this just happened about 1 hour ago, so my memory is fresh. First off, I live in a very rural area, a small village with maybe 10 to 15 houses. It's close to the highway, which is only about a 5-minute drive and also about 10 minutes away from the nearest town. If you cross the street, it's just a 10-minute walk to the forest. It was the afternoon on the first day of Christmas, and my partner and I decided to go for a little walk to help digest all the food we had eaten. It was around 5 in the evening and already dark when we left. We brought a big, bright LED flashlight with us. I also took my camera and my flash, since I love taking pictures of nature at night. We decided to walk along a country road toward the forest, then turn right onto a small graveled cycle track close to the edge of the forest. This track connects our village to the next one, which is about a 15 to 20-minute walk. In the middle of the track, there's a small stretch that goes through the forest. This area is quite dark, with tall, dense trees. When we entered this part, I noticed our flashlight reflecting off something. It was a car parked on the side of the track near the trees. This seemed odd, since cars aren't allowed to drive there, and the path is very narrow and hidden. Feeling cautious, my partner shined the light inside the car, but it seemed empty. I also noticed the windows were frozen, so the car must have been there for a while. A little way in front of the car, I saw an interestingly shaped tree. I asked my partner to shine the flashlight on it so I could focus better and take some pictures with my flash. After I took a few shots, and my partner said, "There's someone standing behind us in the middle of the road, just looking at us." No one had been following us the entire way. I kept looking around occasionally since wild boars sometimes roam near the forest edge at this time of night, especially since it's mating season and they can be more aggressive. Sure enough, a man was standing behind us, just outside the reach of our flashlight. He didn't say anything. He was just standing there watching us. At first, I thought maybe he was startled. After all, it might look strange if someone suddenly starts taking pictures near your car, especially if it's not even allowed on that path. I decided to confront him but kept my distance. I explained that I was just photographing the tree. He didn't respond and continued to stand there silently. I then asked if he needed light, but he simply replied that it wasn't necessary. It felt odd, but I tried to stay calm, thinking there might be a normal explanation for his behavior. Still, my partner and I decided to leave and continued along the path toward the next village, which was only about 5 to 7 minutes away. After we reached the first streetlight in the next village, we looked back. We saw the car drive a little out of the forest, then turn around and go back inside. I could see that he parked there again and turned off his lights. He didn't leave the forest. We ended up taking a much longer route home as I didn't want to go back to the same way for obvious reasons. Our flashlight battery died along the way, and my phone battery was running low, so I didn't call the police right then. However, as soon as we got home, I called and reported all the details. Big regret that I didn't remember the entire license plate. It all happened so quickly that I just didn't think to memorize it. It only struck me as really strange later, especially when I recalled the frozen windows and realized he couldn't have just walked up behind us. Plus, he had no light and didn't respond. It felt like he was sneaking up on us while I was taking the picture. I feel lucky that I had my partner and the camera and a bright flashlight with me. I don't want to imagine what could have happened if I'd been alone. So to the creepy guy sneaking around in the forest, let's not meet. Edit. When I told my housemate, she suggested he might have been spying on the houses near the forest edge. You could easily look into their backyards from a bit up the hill without being seen. It's only about a 5-minute walk. I actually thought about photographing the car when I first saw it, but decided not to as I felt uneasy about it, despite how interesting the scene looked. In hindsight, I think not taking the photo might have saved me. He must have been hiding behind the trees close to the car in the forest entrance. If he was really planning something like a burglary, or something worse like dumping a body, he might have tried to stop me if he thought I'd taken a picture of his car and license plate. Update: I went back and found a small tape marking on one of the trees, a tiny hideout, more like a place to store things than to sit in, and even part of a cut-off backpack. One time I went to a bar with a friend. I had just turned 21, so I hadn't been to many bars up to that point. My friend had been drinking on the way there, so he was already pretty drunk when we arrived. When we sat at the bar, a cute girl came over to talk to us. She introduced herself as Candace, and I noticed she had extremely bright red hair, so bright that I figured it was dyed. It was pretty, but obviously not natural. This girl started flirting with both me and my friend. She could tell my friend was already very drunk, so I decided to play along and pretend I was drunk too, since it seemed to be working for him. I wasn't sure if she was just trying to get free drinks, so I told her we didn't have much money. To my surprise, she offered to buy us drinks. She kept ordering more for us, and I started to get confused about who she was really interested in. My friend eventually went to the bathroom, but before he could come back, the bouncers kicked him out for being too drunk. Candace and I went outside with him. She kept insisting that he should go home with her, but he was so out of it that he could barely respond. I told her he was too drunk to go anywhere, and I didn't want him waking up hungover in some random house with no car and no idea what had happened. Candace kept pushing, saying she'd take care of him, but I refused. I told her I was more sober than him and he was my responsibility. I told her the only way he was going anywhere was if I tagged along. She seemed to think I was either jealous or just trying to interfere, but by that point my friend could barely stand and wasn't even paying attention to her anymore. She then started flirting with me instead, and offered to get my friend a taxi so we could go to her place alone. At this point I'd had a few drinks, so I was buzzed and ended up agreeing. We got my friend into a taxi and then she and I walked to her car. I stumbled slightly on the way and she held onto my arm smiling. "Wow, you're pretty drunk, huh?" she said. I felt a bit shy and anxious. Everything was just happening too easily and it felt a little off. We got in her car and as we drove, she suggested we stop at a liquor store to pick up more drinks. She insisted on paying, so I agreed and asked her to get me a pint of liquor with some apple juice to chase it. She went into the store and came back with more than just a pint. She'd gotten a whole fifth. I assumed she wanted to drink too, which is why she bought so much. As we drove, we passed the bottle back and forth, but I noticed she was only taking tiny sips. I tried to do the same, but she kept encouraging me to drink more. I pretended to drink by spitting the liquor into the apple juice bottle. Eventually, I tossed the apple juice bottle, now full of liquor, out the window when she wasn't looking. She thought I was drinking heavily, but I was really just buzzed, not drunk. During the ride, I deliberately called her by the wrong name a few times to see how she'd react. She didn't correct me and let me keep calling her Carla, which struck me as strange. I began to think she might have lied about her name. When we arrived at her house, I pretended to trip and stumble into her front door. She helped me inside by holding me up, and once we were in, she closed the door and locked it. I thought it was odd, but figured maybe she just didn't want anyone to interrupt us. I told her I needed to use the bathroom. Inside, I looked in the mirror and started feeling strange. Something was off. I could feel myself getting more drunk from the last few sips of liquor, and I didn't want to lose control. So I turned on the sink for noise and made myself throw up. Then I drank some tap water from my hands, hoping it would help sober me up. I still wanted to hook up with Candace, so I planned to keep pretending to be drunk. As I turned off the sink, I heard her talking to someone. "He's drunk as hell, he can barely stand up. You do it." Who was she talking to and what were they planning? I left the bathroom and entered the living room. Just as I stepped in, I saw her quickly walking into another room. All I caught was the back of her head, with that strange, bright red hair disappearing into the next room. I couldn't see her face or anything, just her moving quickly away. The living room was dimly lit. "Hey, where are you going?" I slurred, trying to sound drunk. She returned and told me, "Let's go to my room." I looked at her bright red hair and then at her face, but her eyes looked different. Her face was different. That's when it hit me. This wasn't the same girl. It was another girl, but with the same wig. My heart dropped, but I tried to act like I hadn't noticed. I smiled at her and said I needed to use the bathroom one more time, apologizing for being so drunk. She replied, "It's fine, just hurry up in there." I went back into the bathroom, locked the door, and then heard her whispering to someone. This time I thought I heard a male voice whisper back. I didn't focus on their exact words. I just knew something sketchy was going on, and I had to get out of there. I opened the bathroom window, climbed out, and ran as fast as I could without looking back. I ran through the backyard, hopped a fence, cut through another yard, and reached the main road, where I kept running until I found a 24-hour convenience store. I went inside, stood in front of the security camera, called a taxi, and went home. Since that night, I've often wondered what was going on. What were they planning? Why did she give me a fake name? Why did she try so hard to get my friend and me drunk? I thought it might have been a setup for a robbery, but she spent a lot of money on us, bought drinks, and even paid for my friend's taxi. And why was there a wig that two different women wore? Who was she talking to, and what were they planning to do in that room? Edit. The next day, I went back to the house with a few friends to see if we could figure out what had happened. The place was completely empty. No cars, no people, just an empty house. I later found out that it was a summer rental property, and whoever those people were, they had broken in, used it for just that night, and never came back. This happened 28 years ago in July of 1996. I had just finished my term of service in the Army. I was stationed at Fort Hood, Texas, and decided at midnight that I would out-process and travel back to Wisconsin. All day I was so anxious to leave that I had trouble sleeping. Finally, at 11:45 p.m., I got out of bed and went to sign out with the desk sergeant. Of course, knowing people wanted to sign out at midnight, he decided to do his rounds. You can't leave until you get your final sign-off from the sergeant and turn in your room key. So I waited and waited, and finally at 2:45 a.m. he returned. I turned in my key, got the sign-off, and by 3:30 a.m. I was on my way. At first, I was so full of adrenaline that I felt like I could drive for days. Unfortunately, that adrenaline didn't last long, and by the time I was getting through Dallas, I was starting to nod off. I decided just past Denton that I would pull over at the next rest stop and take a quick nap until the sun came up. I could barely keep my eyes open when I came to a stop. I pulled over and got out of my car to get some air. throw something away, and take a look at my surroundings. There were only about 3 other cars and 2 semi-trucks there. It was a picnic stop, not a full rest stop, so there were no restrooms. I threw my trash away and glanced at a missing persons poster, but I didn't really pay attention to it. I went back to my car, which was a basic Geo Metro. No radio, no power windows, no power locks. I cracked the windows, turned on my boombox for some tunes, and laid down to get some sleep. I was only asleep for about 5 or 10 minutes when I felt my car shake just slightly. I cracked an eye open and looked, but didn't see anything, so I blew it off and went back to sleep. Then I heard what sounded like my door handle being pulled and something scratching on the door key. I sat up quickly but didn't see anyone. I checked all the windows and still didn't see anyone, so I shrugged it off as me being tired and laid back down, turning up the radio. Being a Texas night in July, it was hot, but I was so tired that I just laid back down. A few minutes later, I heard the door handle again and the car shook. I sat up quickly and saw a man standing at the passenger side, looking in. Even though it was hot and humid, he was wearing a red sweatshirt with the hood up, and I couldn't see his face. Being young, dumb, and just out of the military, I yelled at him, "What the hell do you want?" He just stared at me so like an idiot I got out of the car. Mind you, I am only 5'6", but I was pissed. He just walked off towards the picnic tables like nothing happened. All the while, I was yelling at him that if he came back, I'd take him out. I decided I would just drive on from there. I got back in and started driving again. Even though I was upset, only about 10 miles down the road, I was super tired again. Luckily, about another 10 miles down I-35, there was another picnic stop. North Texas doesn't have many rest areas, but it has plenty of picnic stops. I pulled into the second picnic stop and backed into a spot in case I needed to leave quickly. For some reason, there was only one other car there and no semi-trucks. Again, I locked the doors, cracked the windows, and turned on my boombox. I fell asleep right away. About 30 minutes later, I heard a loud thud on my driver's side window. I jumped up, looked around, and saw no one. I got out of the car, which was very stupid, but I had my macho military attitude going. Still, no one was around. I assumed it was my nerves from the other stop. I got back in, locked the doors, and tried to close my eyes. This time, I was too amped up to fall asleep, so I just laid there with my eyes closed. I felt like someone was looking at me, and when I opened my eyes, I saw the guy standing there again in the red sweatshirt with the hood up. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could see that he was smiling at me. I jumped up quickly and tried to open the door to bump him. Since it was a cheap Geo, the doors were locked and it didn't open. He started walking backwards, still staring at me. By the time I got out, he was about 30 feet away facing me. It was fairly dark, but as I looked him over, he seemed real skinny, but about 6'2" or 6'3". But I still felt like I could take him with my military experience. Yeah, right. He was wearing the red sweatshirt, blue jeans, and green tennis shoes. For some reason, I thought the shoes looked odd. I could see something shining every now and then as he stood there staring at me. I believed it was a machete. I quickly reached into my back seat and grabbed my baseball bat, yelling at him to come get some. Not sure why I said that. He started walking towards me and I took a few steps towards him, not really thinking as I got about 5 feet from my car and he was now about 15 feet from me. A yellow van pulled up quickly and parked just off to the side of my car. I finally realized what was really happening, and I saw 2 guys also wearing hooded sweatshirts in the van. Before they could get out, I ran back to my car. I had left the keys in the ignition, so since I had backed in, I was able to cut it hard right and peel out of there. I was so lucky that it was a manual car and I didn't stall. The other two guys were out of the van and the first guy was just about at my car. I jumped back on the interstate and didn't stop until I was about 20 miles into Oklahoma. I stopped for gas and to use the restroom. In the restroom, I noticed that same flyer I barely glanced at the first picnic stop. It was a flyer with several missing persons on it, warning people not to stop for long periods at the rest areas. It described a possible suspect as being about 6 feet tall, wearing blue jeans, green shoes, and a red hooded sweatshirt. I went white. Needless to say, since it was daylight, I drove the rest of the way to Wisconsin wide awake. I'm not sure why, but I never reported it to the number on the flyer or told anyone about it. Now, I live in North Texas, and I pass those two picnic stops every day on my way to work. I think about it often. I wonder if they got anyone else or if they caught those guys. I tried looking it up, but I haven't found any stories about it on the internet. So creepy dudes in the sweatshirts in Texas in July, let's not ever meet again. This happened a long time ago. At the time, I was living alone in a first-floor apartment. My girlfriend had been sick and ended up in the hospital dealing with a rare disease. She recovered fine, but during those weeks, my life was pretty much go to work, go to the hospital to be with her, come back home for dinner, and then bed. It was a Friday night and I was alone, so I decided to distract myself by reading and watching some videos on YouTube. Hours passed, and by 3 in the morning, I was in bed with my iPad in hand, almost falling asleep. Then I heard it. I knew that sound well. You see, right outside my bedroom door was a long corridor that led directly to the kitchen. This apartment was in a building built in the 1950s, and the kitchen door was old and slightly bent. That meant that whenever you turned the doorknob to open the door, it would snap out of place with a distinct clack sound. That was the sound I had just heard. A lot of thoughts ran through my mind in that moment. Had I dreamt it in my semi-sleeping state? Or maybe the sound was real, but the doorknob mechanism broke, causing it to open by itself. Or of course, maybe someone was in my apartment and had just opened the door. At this point, my heart was racing, and I started considering my options. I had a broomstick next to my bed. You might ask why I had it there. And to be honest, I kept it exactly because I lived alone and thought one day I might be in a situation like this where I'd need a weapon. My girlfriend used to joke about it, but I guess my paranoia was paying off in the most unfortunate of situations. So I decided I would take the stick in one hand and grab my cell phone with the other. I planned to open my bedroom door while calling 911. And if no one else was in the apartment, I just apologized to the operator and explained the situation. However, back in those days, my cell phone wasn't a smartphone, but it did have this feature I found interesting, even though I never used it. If you pressed a couple of specific keys, it would start ringing as if someone was calling you. It was meant to simulate an incoming call, helping you get out of a boring conversation or a tough situation. Clumsily, I pressed those keys and the phone started ringing. I quickly shut it off, but now it was clear inside the apartment that I was awake. If someone was outside my bedroom, they had certainly heard it. What was going to happen? I stopped for a few seconds to listen to my surroundings. Nothing. It was dead quiet. I decided to continue with my plan. I dialed 911 with one hand, raised the broomstick with the other, and quickly opened the door. As soon as I did, someone sprinted in front of me in the corridor and quickly went into the kitchen, closing the door behind them. I screamed, "Hey!" and started pursuing, but a split second later I thought, "Stop! What if there is someone else in the apartment? What if another intruder sneaks up on you from behind? In front of me was the corridor to the kitchen, but on my left was another corridor that led to the living room and office. The office light was on, so the intruder had been there, but I didn't know if he had company. I took a step back to the entrance of my room so I wouldn't be caught off guard. "Sir, are you there?" The 911 operator was calling me on the phone. I quickly explained what was happening, gave him my address, and he told me the police were on their way. They had a patrol car nearby, so I should just wait. Then he hung up. The apartment was dead silent. I was terrified. There were only 3 things I had been able to notice about the intruder. He wore a light-colored sweatshirt with horizontal black lines, had dark hair, and smelled really bad. In fact, the smell was still lingering in the apartment. The police arrived after 7 or 8 minutes, which felt like ages. The apartment door was next to the bedroom, so I managed to approach it and unlock the door to let them in. I explained what had happened to the police, and they said we should go through the whole apartment and check every possible hiding place. They had seen situations before where a burglar hid for a long period, even after the homeowners had called the police, later attacking them. The apartment wasn't big, so it was easy to confirm that no one else was hiding there. In the kitchen, it was obvious what had happened. There were large windows that faced the back of the building, overlooking a small community garden. I had left one of the windows open, and outside, along the wall, there was a large drain pipe. The intruder had used that pipe to climb to my window and get inside. The police left to look around the neighborhood for someone matching the description of the sweatshirt I described. While they were gone, I could still smell that horrible odor the intruder left in the apartment. After about 20 minutes, they returned, but they couldn't find anyone. The burglar was long gone. Luckily, he didn't have the chance to steal anything while he was in my apartment. But the audacity. I mean, he must have seen the light on in my bedroom through the edges of the door and still tried to sneak past it to steal something from the office. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, I went to the garden in the back to look for any clues about the intruder, but I couldn't find anything. A neighbor in the building next door was at her window, and I called out to her. I told her what had happened. She just smiled and said, "Well, welcome to the neighborhood. We all have stories like that around here. You should never leave your windows open, and maybe you should consider putting up bars to protect them." The next day, I bought a motion alarm and installed it in the kitchen. I never had another experience like that in that apartment. But to be honest, I never slept the same way in that bedroom again, traumatized by those events. At night, I feared hearing the sound of the kitchen door snapping out of place again. A few years later, I moved to a larger apartment in another neighborhood. This time, it was on the 7th floor, making it much harder for intruders to get in through the windows. So to the intruder who came into my apartment and smelled really bad, let's never meet again. In 2019, I bought tickets for my sister and me to see 21 Pilots in Oklahoma City. At the time, I was a 20-year-old petite woman. I'm a super fan of their music, so I made my sister pack and be ready to line up at the venue around 2 to 3 in the morning to get decent spots in the pit. We got there and were greeted by other fans having a pretty good time. I was able to park my car in a lot pretty close to the venue and got away with it until about 5 to 6 a.m. when police or venue management, I can't remember which, told us that anyone parked in that lot would be towed if not moved within the next hour. By that time, the venue management had made an actual line up to the door. My sister didn't have her license at the time, and we had gotten acquainted with some people in line, so I felt comfortable leaving her there while I found somewhere new to park. Fast forward to me finding a Sonic nearby, and I figured I could get away with free parking. I started the almost 1 mile walk back to the venue. Then I found an alleyway that looked to be one of those nightlife streets connected to bars. Since it was broad daylight and I knew I'd save time going this route, I wasn't apprehensive about taking the alley. About halfway through, I saw a thin man no older than his 40s, sitting at one of the bar's back patios. When he saw me, he made a joke about a pillow I was carrying. My sister had texted me to bring it back so she could nap before the concert. He then asked me where I was headed, and I stupidly told him I was going to the concert downtown. He asked if I wanted drugs, and to which I replied no. Then he asked if he could come with me, and I lied, telling him it was sold out. The entire time I kept walking while he was talking, hoping to shake him off or show no interest in the conversation. When I reached the end of the alley, I had a bad feeling I was being followed. When I turned the corner, I quickly jogged, hoping to gain some distance. Unfortunately, I was right. I remember hearing fast footsteps behind me, then suddenly stopping when I turned to look. It was almost like a movie where he would rush behind something when I turned, thinking I didn't see him. At this point, I panicked and started looking for the closest store. It was about 5:30 to 6 a.m., so anything I passed was closed. Plus, I was in a suburban area with more apartment buildings than stores. I turned another corner and saw a man coming out of his home. I hurried up to him and remember asking if he could help me because I was scared and felt unsafe from someone following me. By this point, the scrawny man from the alley had caught up and was only a few feet away. The man I had approached then looked at both of us and told me, "Sorry, I can't help you," and proceeded to close the door in my face. I've never felt so utterly helpless in my life. I turned to the creepy guy and pleaded with him to please leave me alone. He kept telling me that I wasn't going anywhere and I wasn't going to any concert, along with other threatening comments. By some luck, I spotted a group of people wearing 21 Pilots merchandise across the street and sprinted over to walk next to them. I quickly told them what was happening and asked if I could walk with them to the venue, and they said yes. I think the creepy man lost interest in me and I saw him walking slowly back in the opposite direction. I made it back to the venue safely but immediately broke down when I saw my sister. I thanked my new acquaintances and called the cops. I was told, "He does that a lot and he's not harmless." The venue's bodyguards said they would walk me to my car after the concert, but when I returned to the same spot, they weren't there. To say I was disappointed by how it was handled is an understatement. It still freaks me out to this day how easily I could have been taken or how close I was to not being here to share this story. April 2021. Background. My name is Janelle. I'm a 21-year-old French girl, sorry about my English, and I'm a student in Lille, France. Tired of not finding true love, I decided to lose my virginity to my best friend. After that, I met a fantastic sex friend with whom I got along wonderfully on all levels for 3 months. But then he told me, I still love my ex. Yes, I was devastated. I couldn't take it. I was so done. I went to the emergency room and then the mental hospital. For those of you who are quick to understand, I had already been struggling with depression for a few months, under treatment, with a strong penchant for alcohol. To complete my self-destructive behavior, what better way than dating apps? The match. A few weeks after being released from the mental hospital, I matched with a guy to make new encounters, and mostly to forget my dear and tender sex friend. I always meet the guys at home for a first date because I have zero experience, and that's what I did for my very first date. One day I matched with a guy, let's call him Mathieu. Mathieu wasn't very good looking and had a few extra pounds, but I'm no Beyonce either, so I matched with him. We laughed a bit, had some common interests, and he smoked weed, which seemed like the perfect plan to smoke some joints between two sex sessions. He gave me some personal information like his address. I wasn't sure if it was real. And his old job, he had just been fired. Work or not, I didn't care. I wasn't planning on spending my life with him. I explained to him that I was fragile and had just come out of a mental clinic, and that I was depressed, blah blah blah. I just wanted to make sure he understood that I wasn't someone to be played with. I also told him that I was looking for a sex session, but with conversation, affection, and cuddles, not just a quickie. He assured me that was exactly what he was looking for too, and that he was actually very cuddly. Perfect. After just 1 or 2 days of chatting, we agreed on a date, a mojito party at my house, and he would bring some joints. The meeting. Mathieu arrived. He wasn't cute at all, worse than in the photos. He had greasy hair, a stained t-shirt, and looked like a teenager who still hadn't figured himself out, even though he was 26. I wasn't exactly feeling attracted to him, but I desperately needed some company. I offered to make the drinks while he went to the kitchen to prepare 2 mojitos before joining me on the sofa. We talked a bit, but he wasn't very smart or interesting, so I drowned in my drink, hoping to make the party more fun myself. After that, I don't remember much. Reconstruction. According to Mathieu, we had drunk and smoked while watching a movie before going to the bedroom. I vaguely remember being naked on my bed and seeing him dressed, standing above me looking at me before turning and slamming the door. My phone was dying. My alarm wasn't ringing. I missed a work meeting, so my friends started calling me. They couldn't reach me, so they contacted my sister, but she also went to voicemail. My friends came to my apartment, ringing the doorbell repeatedly, but there was no answer. They called the fire department, who managed to open the bottom door but not the door to my apartment. They knocked on the door and called out to me, and I finally opened it, dressed in a blanket to hide my nakedness, feeling confused. The firemen concluded that I was just hungover and left, while my friends helped me get dressed. They noticed that my body was covered in yellow betadine on my arms, legs, stomach, etc. I told them I had burned myself the previous day and was trying to heal it, but there were no signs of burns on my arm, and I didn't even own any betadine. They took my cat and brought me to one of their houses since I was in a comatose state. I had trouble speaking. I seemed completely out of it, and I had trouble thinking. The next day, my sister came to pick me up, and I stayed with her for a few days. Everyone thought I had tried to kill myself with drugs and alcohol. I started complaining about pains that weren't there before, so my sister took me to the hospital. I explained to them that I may have had unprotected sex while I was unconscious, and we followed procedures. A hepatitis B vaccine and a slew of samples. I was advised to file a complaint, and I was redirected to the OB emergency. The next day, I regained some consciousness. My family noticed right away that I was a little more alert and my statements made sense. I went to the GYN emergency, got swabs done, and started preventive AIDS treatment. Over the course of a week, I had several appointments for blood and urine samples. I also filed a complaint with the testimony of my friends who had been at my house and my sister who had taken care of me. After discussing it with people of all ages as well as medical staff and the police, the term organ trafficking was brought up. They believed the guy had chickened out at the last minute. Despite my complaint, my body covered in betadine, my torn underwear, and the blood on my apartment doors. What the hell? My attacker got away with it. I will never know what really happened or what he truly wanted. I want to point out that I used to drink and smoke, in addition to my treatment, and I've never had a blackout lasting 3 days before. I'm pretty sure he put something in my drink. It's good to talk about it though, so thank you. Hi there. I've shared this story with a few of my friends before, and after getting advice from some of them, I decided to post it here. I apologize in advance if my English isn't perfect, as it's not my first language. This happened when I was about 13 years old. I lived right on the beach, and if you walked about 1.5 kilometers down the shoreline, you'd reach a place where the ocean would leave behind a kind of lake. It was a popular spot where my friends and I liked to hang out, and next to it were 2 dirt roads. I had a German shepherd, and every weekend my mother would kick me out of the house for a few hours to go play with the dog, which I didn't mind. There was a cliff above the beach that you could walk down to get to the lake, but it was covered with forest, and on that day it was especially hot. So I decided to take a shortcut through the forest to spare both myself and my dog from the heat. I'd done this many times before, so I wasn't afraid at all. However, as I was walking, I started to hear muffled footsteps behind me. My dog was off leash and up ahead, and I quickly realized that someone had to be sneaking up on me since it was almost impossible to walk quietly on the dry foliage. I made a run for it, heading toward the exit of the forest. As I did, the footsteps behind me became more audible. Fortunately, I made it out of the forest and to the lake, which was open and plain. I spotted one of my friends there. My dog was already in the water when I greeted her, but then we noticed a large man approaching us. He was easily close to 2 meters tall and very slim. He started talking to us both very kindly, and not thinking anything of it, we politely responded. At that time, I didn't connect the footsteps to this man, but later I realized I should have. He asked us a lot of questions, where we were from, if anyone was here with us, and so on. Little by little, we started feeling creeped out, so we said our goodbyes, claiming we had to meet up with our other friends, and moved a bit further down the lake. We sat there for a while talking, when suddenly my dog started growling. She never growled, so this immediately caught my attention. I turned to see what she was growling at, and to my horror, the man was standing about 50 meters behind us. By now we realized what was going on and moved again, but he was even closer this time. We were terrified. This man was following us, and we were completely alone. My friend called her mother, who was at least an hour away, so we were stuck alone with this man for quite a while. The more we moved, the closer he came. I had to leash my dog as she was growling even more fiercely at him. Each time we looked at him, he smiled back, as if we were old friends. He followed us for a while until we saw my friend's mother's car arriving on the dirt road, which was about 200 meters away. To get there, we'd have to cross where the man was standing. We were absolutely terrified. Luckily, when my friend's mother saw the situation, she started running toward us, which got the man's attention and gave us the chance to dash. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my life. I let my dog go and we sprinted for the car. As we reached it, the man started running after us, but we managed to get inside just in time. My friend's mother called the police, and we waited in the car while the man threw rocks and screamed at us. Eventually, he ran off when the police arrived. The police questioned everyone and went looking for the man, but they never found him. To this day, I'm still terrified he might be hiding in that forest, waiting for me. I didn't know that my friend would be there that day, and I don't know what would have happened if she wasn't. I didn't have a phone or any way to contact anyone, and I'm sure that if he had caught me, my dog wouldn't have been able to help. So to the creepy man who stalked me and my friend, let's never meet again. I've been thinking about sharing this incident for a while now. I've told people I know in person, but I want to get my story out there to help spread awareness about things like this, and in an effort to help put it further behind me. For some context, this happened to me in early April of this year. At the time, I was a 25-year-old male to female, MTF, transgender person, and I was pre-hormone replacement therapy, HRT, with more masculine clothes. At the risk of sounding cliche, I never thought something like what happened that evening could ever happen to me, but it did. The part that still bothers me is that it happened so close to where I live with my family. In fact, it was only 2 blocks away. Now, on to the incident. There have been a few times in our house when no one feels like cooking dinner, so we either order out or find our own food. That evening was one of those times. I was craving pizza, so after putting on my spring jacket and a pair of gloves, I left my house around 7:20 p.m. and started walking to the nearest Domino's. In case anyone asks, I can't drive, and it was only a 15-minute walk anyway. Partway there, I came across an old white car. I think it was either a Honda or a Ford that was parked on the sidewalk. I was annoyed but didn't think much about it. I decided to walk around the front of the car to avoid walking onto the road. Unfortunately, that's where I unintentionally caught the wrong kind of attention. I had barely stepped 10 feet away from the car when I suddenly heard 2 people calling out to me aggressively as I was readjusting my gloves. When I turned around, I saw 2 intimidating-looking men. The younger of the 2 approached me, while the older one remained by the door of the building where the car was parked. I don't remember much about the older guy, Thug 2, other than that he was a big man with a beard and a leather jacket. But I'll never forget the younger guy, Thug 1. He was slightly taller than me. I'm 5'6", with short hair and a goatee. He was wearing sneakers, a ring and blue jeans, and a white muscle shirt. This guy was aggressive from the start, getting into my personal space and immediately accusing me of breaking into his buddy's car. Thug 2 interjected with something along the lines of, "You better not have," which made me realize it was likely his car I had just walked around, and I was being accused of breaking into it. I'm doing my best to describe what happened next, but honestly everything was a blur. I remember trying to explain myself, but Thug 1 didn't even give me the chance. I remember the anger in his eyes as he kept accusing me. The next thing I knew, I was on the ground, my right elbow cut open from the asphalt after being hit with a left hook to the face. I remember screaming at him to leave me alone as he punched me again, this time just above my hairline. I felt something warm on my head, pulled my gloved hand away, and saw blood where his ring had hit me. I had to scramble to pick up one of my breast forms that had fallen out of my pocket bra and onto the ground, before I managed to half stumble, half run away from the 2 men. They were taunting me, telling me I'd better run. Looking back, I wish I had pulled out my phone to take a picture of my attackers, but I think I subconsciously feared it would make things worse. This happened around 7:30 p.m. I managed to get as far away from the building as I could before sitting down in front of a nearby soccer club and calling my sister, 20 years old, for help. She immediately told my stepdad, and they both came to pick me up in his car. We stopped at Domino's to get my pizza, which I didn't end up finishing that night but ate the rest the next day, along with napkins and a bag of ice for my injuries. After dropping me off at home, my stepdad took my brother, 25 years old, and went back to the building to check for cameras that might show what happened, while my sister helped me sanitize my wounds. It was there that I started to understand what had really happened. It turned out the building in question was a base for a local biker gang, which was associated with one of the most infamous gangs in North America. My stepdad and brother talked to the members who were there. They later told me the white car was gone, and the two men I described were nowhere to be found. And they claimed 4 things. First, they claimed not to know who attacked me, even though those men had walked out of their gang base. Second, they claimed they were in the middle of a wake for a friend they had lost. Third, they said an hour before I walked by, a person under the influence of drugs had been messing with their car door, so they assumed I was that person. Lastly, despite knowing I was there, they claimed the cameras at the building were broken and not in use. At first, I considered not doing anything about what happened and just moving on. But after my dad called to check on me after hearing about the incident, I was convinced to go to the police station at 9 p.m. to file a report. While we all felt that the case probably wouldn't go anywhere, as it often does with incidents involving gangs, especially infamous ones, we knew it was still important to document it for the police. The officer taking my report suggested I go to the emergency room to be safe, where I ended up waiting for 5 to 7 hours to be seen by a doctor. During the wait, I was worried about what would happen if I fell asleep after taking 2 blows to the head. Thankfully, the doctor reassured me I would be fine while stitching up the wound where Thug 1 had hit me the second time. Eventually, I was sent home with instructions to be careful with my stitches while I showered, which I did as soon as I got home between 2:30 and 4:30 a.m. I'm very lucky that I didn't walk away with more serious injuries. After that night, it took me an entire week before I finally felt comfortable going outside. Even now, months later, despite the gang having moved their base, I still feel reluctant to walk right past that building. If I have to, I tend to walk on the other side of the road. I never saw Thug 1 or Thug 2 again, though I heard rumors that the gang punished them for assaulting me as they were allegedly trying to reduce their violence. And honestly, I hope I never see them again. I'm a little shaky recalling that night while typing this, but I wanted to share my story to help raise awareness about gang violence. It was autumn in 2015 and I was 23 years old. I am now 31. At that time, I lived in Lancaster while studying at Lancaster University. For those who may not be familiar, Lancaster is a small, charming town in the north of England. As a student, you could either live on campus or in private accommodation in the town. I had chosen to live in a newly renovated apartment in a nice part of town, and yes, it was expensive. I had already been studying for 2 years and was now in my 3rd year. By this time, I had become familiar with the layout of the town and felt comfortable and safe living there semi-independently, along with 2 other friends who were also studying at the university. Since my 1st year, I had decided to improve my fitness by going on nightly runs around either the campus or the town. By my 3rd year, I was living in the town center, so I would either run with my housemate or on my own. It's important to note that Lancaster has a large residential area that is hilly and far from the bustling town center, which at the time was a hub for students and locals, probably drinking in pubs or eating pies. Occasionally, I would run with my housemate, but I preferred running alone listening to heavy metal. I was a big fan of Deftones during that period. On this particular evening, a chilly autumn night, I had decided to run alone. It was about 8 p.m. and I had my earphones in. I had started running toward a more isolated district that led to a beautiful residential area and a large park called Williamson Park. The park had a butterfly museum at the top of a hill. Next to the park was a large graveyard, the kind that stretches for miles and has different sections. Large yew trees, crumbling graves, and a crypt in the center overrun with leaves and ivy. What was especially eerie about this cemetery was that it contained the ruins of an old mental asylum or hospital. You could sneak into the asylum grounds by walking across the cemetery and crawling through a small hole in the fence. This wasn't recommended though, since guard dogs roamed the derelict building. It was definitely not a place you wanted to be at night. So I made my way past Williamson Park and up to the entrance of the graveyard. Immediately my attention was drawn to something small, standing by the imposing gates of the graveyard. These gates were tall black iron and located at the bottom of a winding path. I felt a little apprehensive, but it wasn't unusual to see people walking their dogs around the graveyard. So I slowed my pace and started walking toward the shape. As I got closer, I realized that the shape was a child, around 9 or 10 years old. She was running toward me frantically. She looked panicked and scared, and I think she was crying. I vividly remember that the girl wasn't wearing a coat, just a thin dress that would not be suitable for the cold autumn air in Lancaster. She asked me for help. She was desperate and seemed frightened of something. She kept looking back into the graveyard, which was completely pitch black beyond the gates. There was absolutely no light beyond the path. The graveyard was large, so it was unsettling to see the depth of the darkness and the vulnerable child standing at the entrance, helpless. I don't recall exactly what the girl said, but I offered to call the police. I had dialed 999 on my phone and put it on loudspeaker. The girl immediately changed. She wasn't happy that I was calling the police, and it was obvious. She stopped crying and her tone became angry and demanding. She insisted that she didn't need the police. I reassured her that it would be best to inform the police. I even offered to walk her to the station, which was about 20 minutes down the hill. This is where the story gets strange and a little terrifying. The girl turned and ran back into the graveyard. She ran directly through the gates into the pitch-black darkness. She didn't turn back, just ran as fast as she could until she completely disappeared. It was then completely silent. I was spooked beyond belief. Standing alone in a darkened street, I had so many questions. Who was the girl? Why was she alone? Why was she afraid of the police? Why wasn't she scared of the dark? Who might she have been running to or from? I turned and ran all the way back down the hill, not stopping until I reached a well-lit, populated area. Safe to say I didn't run alone at night again. Anyway, it's a mystery that has haunted me ever since. Little girl in the graveyard, let's definitely not meet again. I'm a 31-year-old woman, and I've been living in the same apartment complex for nearly 4 years. There's a guy who's about 45 years old who lives on the same floor as me, and he's been there for about the past year or so. He is so awful. I usually don't pay much attention to or recognize many of the people who live here, but I quickly started noticing this guy because of how rude he is. Whenever we would happen to ride the elevator together in the morning before work, he would just glare at me. Then, when we'd walk out the glass doors into the parking lot, I'd be walking behind him, and he'd let the doors close on me without holding them open. One day, about 6 months ago, my fiancé and I walked up behind him waiting for the elevator. When he saw us, he stood in front of us and shook his head almost in disgust. Keep in mind that neither my fiancé nor I had ever had a conversation with this man. Then things started to get really strange. About 6 months ago, I decided to hold the elevator doors open for him when I saw him coming down the hall. He thanked me, and when we got downstairs, for the first time ever, he held the doors open for me. The next time my then fiancé, now husband, saw him in the parking lot, whenever he saw my husband with me, he mouthed effing garbage to himself as he passed us. But it gets worse. Whenever I see him alone in the parking lot, he smiles at me. It's almost like he's smirking, like two people who have some sort of history together, or like we know each other personally. It's so weird. About a month ago, when he saw my husband and me together again in the mailroom, he covered his face with his mail. Can someone please explain what the hell is going on with this man? I took a lot of psychology classes in college, and even I can't explain this behavior. I'm honestly getting strange serial killer vibes. Like I said, we have literally never had a conversation with him. My husband and I are both very friendly people, and I feel like we give off those kinds of vibes. It's just so strange. I'm an 18-year-old girl and live with my parents on their farm. We have a relatively big house with a nice back patio. We got a hot tub a while back, which my parents use a lot, and I sometimes join them. Since I have my own car, my parents have gotten more comfortable with leaving me at the house when they go away for extended periods of time. The longest they've been gone is almost a week, and they kept in contact with me the entire time. I just take care of our animals and relax when I'm not working, and I've gotten used to being alone. My parents were both raised in farming and ranching families, but I was a city kid until they bought a farm and moved us out here. I'm used to it now, but it took quite a bit of getting used to, considering I'd lived in our previous house for 13 years and knew the city like the back of my hand. You could have placed me anywhere, and I'd be able to find my way back home one way or another. It's been a few years, and I consider myself well adjusted. Obviously, there are pros and cons, but I'm at peace with where we are now. One thing that took a lot of getting used to was how much space we have. In my old house, my bedroom window lined up with my next-door neighbor's kitchen window, and so my curtains were drawn shut 95% of the time. Now, with my bedroom being on the second floor and our neighbors being about 100 yards away, I can get changed with the window open and not worry about being seen. I mention this because it's unusual to have anyone walk past our driveway nowadays, as opposed to the city, where it was weird when people didn't pass by. Anyway, this took place a few weeks ago, and my parents had gone to a distant cousin's wedding, leaving me at the house to look over the farm. I was fine with this, as I didn't really know the cousin very well, but I sent my well wishes with my parents, and we sent constant updates back and forth for the few days they were gone. Earlier, I mentioned that we have a hot tub on our back patio. I believe it was the second or third night, and I'd gotten home from work absolutely exhausted, and decided to relax in the hot tub for a bit to soothe my sore muscles before going to bed. I'm a bit of a night owl, so by the time I'd taken a nap and had dinner, it was around 11 p.m., and the sun had pretty much set. Another one of my favorite things about living on our farm is the lack of light pollution. I can look up and easily see the stars above me. I've always been into astrology and astronomy, and I love stargazing. That was part of the reason I waited so long before going out to the hot tub. Anyway, I went out, got myself settled, and just sat in the hot water, enjoying the stars and heat and occasionally sipping my drink that I brought out with me. It was still light enough that I could see the edge of our property, but dark enough that I could see the stars relatively well. I had probably only been out there for about 10 minutes when I suddenly got a chill down my spine, and it wasn't from the breeze on my heated skin. I felt like I was being watched. Immediately, I snapped out of my daze and turned to where I felt the feeling was coming from. It took my eyes a bit to adjust. I'm nearsighted but didn't wear my glasses outside, and when they did, I felt my stomach drop at what I saw. From the patio looking straight ahead, you can see our barn, which has some fences connected to it that make up a couple of pens. Our older horses are in the largest pen to the right of the barn, and behind that pen is a large field that stretches to a row of saplings. Behind those saplings is a barbed wire fence which indicates the edge of our property. To the left of the barn is a patch of trees that lead into the forest that surrounds our property, though there are a few divots here and there where we've set up some other farm things like a garden and chicken coop. While I couldn't see directly behind the barn, I could see beyond it into the field behind the pens, which is where I spotted what I figured caused my feeling of unease. A few feet out of the forest, standing between two of the saplings at the edge of our field, was a figure of what I assume was a person, just standing there in the darkness. I immediately knew that was where the feeling was coming from, and I stood up in the hot tub and turned to face the person. For a few moments I just stood there looking at them. I don't know if they saw me, but when they didn't move after me staring at them for a solid minute, I decided enough was enough and got out of the hot tub. I closed everything up as quickly as I could while trying not to look panicked and went inside, where I immediately turned on all the lights, shut all the windows, and locked all the doors. My dogs had been inside the whole time, none the wiser to the trespasser, and I figured it'd be best if I didn't alert them to what was going on, in case it turned out to be nothing, even though I was pretty sure I was right about what I'd seen. I debated on calling the police, but I lived 20 minutes from the nearest town, so by the time they got here the person would likely be gone. Besides, it was midnight at this point, and I didn't want to wake any of my neighbors with the commotion authorities may bring. I resolved to sit in the living room with my dogs and keep an eye on the person from inside. Our living room has windows that face outside in the same direction our back door to the patio does, so I could still see the same view from the hot tub, albeit a little more difficult with the lights on. But ever since I'd seen the figure, it was impossible to not notice them afterward. The thought crossed my mind to grab my stepdad's rifle from the basement, but I had no idea where he stored it, or even how to use it, so it wasn't a wise idea, especially because going to get it would mean I'd have to leave my post in the living room and leave the person unsupervised. The more time passed, the more antsy I became. The person was just standing there, not doing anything, in the same position I'd spotted them in, and their apparent lack of motive was unnerving me like nothing else. I resolved that if they didn't leave within the next half hour, I'd call the police, because by that point the person would have been standing there for about an hour, trespassing on our property. More time passed. I stayed in the living room, my phone in hand and dogs at my feet, looking out the window every few minutes to see if the figure was still there, which they were. By now it was 12:15 in the morning, and they still hadn't moved. Internally, I was thinking about who this person could possibly be, and what reason they'd have to do this. We're a friendly community, and we know pretty much all of our neighbors, though everyone mostly keeps to themselves. It was unlikely that anyone knew my parents weren't home and that I was alone. There were 2 vehicles parked in our driveway, mine and my mom's, as my parents had taken my stepdad's truck to travel in. As far as I knew, we didn't have any issues with anyone, which made this scenario even more confusing and terrifying. It was 12:20 when things finally changed. As I was looking out the window for probably the 50th time that night, I saw the figure move. I froze, not moving a muscle, as I watched them turn and walk back the way I assumed they'd come, to the left where they disappeared behind the barn, presumably back into the forest. My relief was only temporary, because while they were gone, they could still very well be on our property, just hiding out in the trees. The feeling of being watched was gone though, which made me feel a little bit better, though not by much. I decided to pull an all-nighter and stayed up until the sun rose. I passed out on the couch. I woke up around 1 p.m. and had a moment where I thought I'd dreamt the whole thing. Just in case, after I finished my chores, I made my way across the field behind the animal pens to our property line and walked from one end to the other, to where the figure would have disappeared behind the barn, to see if I could find anything out of the ordinary. It had been dry for the past week, so the grass and dirt didn't show any footprints or any sign anyone had been there at all, which made me suspect that maybe I had imagined the whole thing. I have a history of being paranoid because of my anxiety, and have had multiple nervous breakdowns over things that turned out to be inconsequential. Still, I couldn't just forget about that feeling I'd gotten in the hot tub that night. The unmistakable feeling of having someone's eyes on me and not being able to tell who. To this day, I have no idea who it could have been, and to be honest, I don't really want to. Nothing like that has happened since, and I'm hoping it stays that way. To the figure that stood at the edge of my parents' property and watched me in the hot tub in the middle of the night, let's not meet. So this is something I've kept completely to myself, except for a confused call to my best friend the morning after to try and figure out if what I thought happened actually happened. Truthfully, the event that caused this incident was my fault, and also so stupid, that I think I've been too embarrassed or mad at myself to share the story. I had only been living in New Orleans for about 2 weeks the night this occurred. And while I'd never been to New Orleans once in my life prior to moving there, a decision resulting from my desperation to get a job out of college, I am from a similarly large metro area in the American South, so I'm familiar with the dynamic of a city like this. One minute you'll see kids playing catch in the streets and young couples walking arm in arm down tropically adorned sidewalks, and the next you'll see dilapidated houses, still not made whole since Katrina and further degraded from Ida. Gang violence, young boys posted up on street corners, and unimaginable poverty tied to rampant drug abuse. In the end, it's just all about knowing where to go, and which areas to avoid entirely. Anyway, I was driving home from running some obscure errand at night around 9:30 p.m. that caused me to drive through St. Claude. For those who don't know, this is certainly one of those neighborhoods that should be avoided if possible. As I came upon a stop sign right next to a small community center or food bank place, I suddenly slammed on the brakes due to driver's instinct, before really even understanding why I did it. Standing just feet away from my front bumper was a tiny cat, its wide eyes staring back at me in terror as it became briefly blinded by my headlights. That damn cat. This is where my stupidity comes into play. I didn't really know where I was or how dangerous of an area it was, and without even thinking for a single moment, I stepped outside of the car to assess the situation, maybe see if I could help the little guy. I didn't even remove my keys from the ignition as I figured I'd only be there for a little bit, nor did I grab my phone from the charger. I thought I'd either be able to beckon the cat and help it, or it would dart away and then I'd slip back into my car and head home. What I didn't realize when I knelt down on the pavement was that I was too close to the barely open car door. Of course, when I stood up, I bumped it and it immediately swung shut. No big deal, I thought, assuming the door would be unlocked, only to feel my heart sink when it didn't budge. Well, great. I didn't panic immediately. After trying all 4 doors and cursing myself for a solid minute for being such an idiot, I spotted a man sitting on the steps of the community center eating, and he spotted me. Noticing my situation, he slowly stood and came to the back of my car with his bag of Raising Cane's chicken, plopped it down on the hood, and proceeded to enjoy his dinner on the back of my Subaru. By this point, I'd already been there for about 10 minutes, so honestly, the company was relieving. I didn't look as helpless to passers-by with him there. For context, I'm 5 feet tall and was wearing a tiny tank top to fend off the brutal New Orleans summer heat. After I explained my situation, he told me he could try to jimmy the door open, and desperate to get back in, I agreed. It was useless, unfortunately, and I could tell he was just fiddling around. I trotted over to a small church across the intersection where I spotted a few people closing up for the night. Sanctuary, I thought. Nice churchgoers have to help a woman lost and alone, right? Wrong. The man locking up looked straight through me back at the guy trying to open my locked car, shook his head and shot me a glance that said, "Do you think I'm stupid?" Then he stepped right into his car. I felt the tears welling up but quickly told myself to suck it up and walked back over to my car. By the grace of God, the random stranger let me use his phone to call a locksmith, called Papa Lock, who told me he'd be there anywhere between 45 minutes and 4 hours. Great. After about 25 minutes of chit-chatting, the man informed me that his shift was about to start, and just as quickly as he appeared, he was gone. This is when the gravity of my situation really began to sink in. I became acutely aware of my surroundings and the men who had been circling the block on their bicycles during our conversation. I don't know about y'all, but I don't know many grown men who ride around leisurely on bikes after 10 p.m. just for the fun of it, especially not in the same big circles in the same neighborhood. I heard the distant squeak of the wheels, and before I could duck for cover, they lapped the block again, now aware that I was utterly alone. They continued down the block, and I realized I needed to find somewhere to be by the time they returned. I swiftly walked towards the community center, but I quickly realized it was too illuminated, and I'd be making myself a beacon. Plus, as I rounded the corner, I saw a tall man standing in total darkness along the side of the building, just staring straight ahead at the steps. Desperate, I jogged over to the church, hearing the wheels nearing again, and squatted down behind the big sign out front. As I sat in the dirt, I couldn't help but cry just a little. The combination of fear and frustration really pushed me over the edge. After a while, I didn't hear any more movement. My butt hurt from sitting on the ground, and the bugs were coming out beneath me, so I decided to move like some stupid game of hide and seek. I had spotted a fenced-off area that looked like a restaurant earlier, and after finding the door unlocked, I darted inside and latched it behind me, sighing with relief. At that point, I situated myself at a table where I could peer through the fence at my car to see if the locksmith pulled up. After what felt like days, but was probably 1 to 2 hours, the horrifying realization dawned on me. I had only made one call to Papa Lock and gave a vague description of the intersection. What if they couldn't find me? What if they had already driven past and were long gone? I didn't know if I should keep waiting or venture back out. After about 30 minutes, I decided I would just have to go out there. The men were gone, and although it was a bad neighborhood, it would only get worse the later it got. It's so painfully obvious in retrospect. But of course, the moment I left the safety of the restaurant, those wheels began to round the corner. Great. I couldn't have looked more out of place and vulnerable. I felt so exposed, but there was no time to go back across the intersection to the fenced area, and to get to the church I'd have to run through the path of the two men. As I sprinted toward my car, a black truck rolled by, and to my horror, stopped just moments after passing me, put it in reverse, and slowly rolled back in my direction. I almost resigned myself to my seemingly inevitable capture or assault as I watched it come toward me. I pretended to walk away as if I weren't utterly aimless. The men on the bikes were so close now. Then, as if in an episode of CSI, the pop-a-lock truck rounded the corner. I instantly began waving my arms to flag them down, and as the black truck drove off, my savior parked his van. Apparently, he had been looping around the area for 20 minutes trying to find me and was about to give up to go help another stranded woman. If I had stayed behind the fence, he likely would have, and I would have been left without any means of communication to call anyone else for help. The moment I got inside my beloved Subaru, I began sobbing at the click of the locks behind me. God, it was pure relief to be secured within a locked space. Even as I'm writing this now, I feel dramatic, like I was freaking out over nothing. But in my recollection, working through the details does help to validate my experience. So to those men on their little bikes, let's never meet again. I grew up in a quiet suburb outside Houston. While it wasn't the kind of neighborhood where people left their doors unlocked, it was relatively peaceful. Still, Houston has a way of turning situations from 0 to 100 quickly, so locking the doors was second nature to everyone. Most of the time, the worst problems were teen vandalism or car break-ins, annoying but nothing truly scary. At the time, I worked retail at a clothing store that closed at 9. One night, a co-worker I was becoming friends with asked if I could give her a ride home. Her place was a bit out of the way, but I didn't mind. Her neighborhood was on the sketchy side, but I didn't think too much about it. I drove her to her apartment, and we sat in the car chatting for a bit before she headed inside. As she walked to her door, I stayed in the car watching to make sure she got in safely. Around me, some residents were outside drinking and talking loudly, something that would have been unusual in my neighborhood at 10 p.m. on a weeknight, but here it seemed normal. She blinked the lights from inside to let me know she was safely in, and I headed back home to my parents' house. This was before cell phones were common, so we had a routine. I'd call her from my house once I got home to confirm we were both safe. I don't really remember the drive home. I probably cranked up some tunes, sang along, and parked in the driveway. The outside lights were on. Mom always made sure of that. I went inside without any issues. Now, a bit about my parents. They were alcoholics, though not the mean kind. By day, they functioned okay, but by night it wasn't uncommon to come home to find them passed out. That night, I found my mom sprawled on the couch, TV still blaring. Dad was likely passed out in his man cave. From experience, I knew better than to turn off the lights or TV. If I did, Mom would wake up irritated, complaining that I'd woken her up. So I left everything as it was and went to the bathroom to wash up. After getting ready for bed, I called my friend to let her know I was home. One of my bad habits is that I'm terrible at ending conversations. Even though I was tired and had finals the next day, we kept rambling on about work and other random things. I was lying in bed, lights off, talking, when something caught my attention. My room was at the front of the house, and there was this weird wall in front of my window. A mid-century modern thing that didn't make much sense but blocked some light from passing cars. The occasional car would pass by, casting a square of light on the wall. It was something I barely noticed anymore. But that night I noticed beams of light moving oddly across the wall. Flashlights. I paused, thinking it might be some kids messing around. Our house had never been a target for pranks, so I wasn't too concerned, but it was strange. My friend urged me to call the police, but I wasn't a fan of that idea. Flashlights in the yard didn't seem like enough to bother the cops about. Besides, what could they do? Still, I decided to check things out. I see well in the dark and the lights in the living room were still on, so I didn't bother turning any extra lights on. I told my friend I was going to check the front door. It must have been a long conversation by this point for what happened next to unfold. As I neared the living room, I heard something coming from the kitchen. A strange, metallic slapping sound. I told my friend and she insisted again that I call the police. But for what? Flashlights? Weird noises. The kitchen lights were on too. You have to picture it. The house looked like it was fully awake. The living room lights were on, the TV was on, the kitchen was lit up. But my mom was completely passed out on the couch. So I headed toward the kitchen, curious about the noise. At the very end of the kitchen was a small window with metal blinds. The blinds were rattling, making that metallic slapping sound. For a second, I thought, is the window open? We weren't the kind of people who left windows open. Occasionally, we'd crack one if something burned in the kitchen, but it was always brief. As I stood there, staring at the window trying to make sense of it, I saw something that stopped me cold. The front of a shoe on the sill. I screamed, and I don't just mean a little yell. I unleashed a banshee wail. I screamed so loudly I probably made up for a lifetime of low talking in that one moment. The foot vanished. My mom jolted awake and my friend was shrieking on the other end of the phone. From the back of the house, my dad came running out with his gun. I hung up the phone and called the police. Grabbing another gun, I followed my dad outside. Now, I'm not a gun person, and going outside was incredibly stupid. But my scream had done its job. No one was there anymore. Feeling like I'd watched one too many police shows, I told everyone not to touch the windowsill, imagining the cops would dust for fingerprints or take shoe impressions to track down the culprit. It was almost cute how naive I was. The police arrived half an hour later. It was a good thing we weren't in any real danger by then. In the meantime, my mom started doubting what I'd seen, suggesting maybe she'd left the window open after all. But no, the police confirmed that the window had been pried open, and that someone had carefully removed all the knickknacks from the sill, setting them quietly on the ground. They hadn't wanted to make any noise. It wasn't until that moment that the true horror sank in. These weren't just thieves looking to grab some electronics. They knew the house was occupied. They were sneaking in for something far worse. But what exactly? I asked when they'd be taking fingerprints, and the officer just chuckled. Nothing was stolen, so they weren't interested. We locked all the windows down, and I stayed up all night, haunted by the question, what were they planning to do to us? I want to talk about one of the scariest things I've experienced, which was quite recent. I'm sorry this is long. Recently I, a 24-year-old female, was living in a women's shelter and I made some really good friends there. We used to sit at this park across from a temple at night, drinking and smoking, whatever. We'd be there for hours listening to my music, just having fun and talking about our lives. We were all quite young in our early 20s. I should mention that we were all there due to a fair amount of trauma in our lives, and we connected through that a lot. One night, my friends and I went to a party in the city, where we had been drinking for hours and weren't tired when it was over. So when me and my closest friend there, who was 22 years old, Got back to the shelter, we decided to sit in the park, watch the sunrise, and drink a little more. We were there for a while when we suddenly heard R&B or rap music coming from the temple across the street. I might add that we are both mixed-race black girls, and we were very tipsy, so we thought it would be a strange adventure to see who was playing my favorite song so loud in the morning. It could be a potential friend, or we'd learn about the place. It was a beautiful temple. We walked over and the gates were locked. We were disappointed, but then a man came out to greet us and said we could come in to see the temple. He mentioned that it was his music, and he loved that we liked the same songs. We went in and he showed us around the temple. It was beautiful at the bottom, but we noticed a lot of rooms with beds. He told us that if we ever wanted to rent rooms, we could, for an unbelievably cheap price. As homeless girls without much work, we thought it was an amazing opportunity, almost too good to be true. At first, I felt nothing but positive vibes. He showed us his computer, which was playing the music, and asked what songs we'd like to hear. I got comfortable with him, he was funny, and we all got along well. Anyway, we started talking about recreational activities that rhyme with marijuana. We had some, so we offered him some because he was just so cool and chill. He said he would pack ours with our stuff, and that's important later. I should also mention that he was constantly complimenting me specifically, my hair and my skin color, and giving very forward compliments that made me uncomfortable. He asked if I liked Asian men and if I'd ever slept with one. He was of East Asian descent, but I'm not sure from where. He then asked more questions about my sexual preferences and even told us that he gave very bad drugs, ones no one should ever take, to girls so he could sleep with them. He also said he'd seen us sitting at the park sometimes through his window. All of this was becoming a pile of red flags. Then he said that if we had another friend, they could take his room because he was moving soon. That's when I got a weird feeling, so I asked him why he was leaving if the rent was so cheap. He wouldn't answer, dodging the question, and my intuition started telling me something was wrong. I asked if I could get some water. He told me to get it from the fridge, but I went out, and there was another guy who offered me water. I decided to use the tap, but the first man ran out of the room and said, "No, take the one from the fridge." I told him I was fine with the tap. He then walked me back to the room, and I sat down next to my friend. Then he said something disturbing. "I'm moving because I hear people screaming and having orgies at night, banging on my door, and it disturbs my sleep." I was like, what? It was almost like he accidentally let that slip out. I asked him if it was nightmares, ghosts, or real people making these noises at night, but he continued to dodge the questions. I asked him why on earth he hadn't told us this earlier. We were honestly in disbelief, but he kept ignoring what we were saying and started acting strange. I then noticed that when I'd come back earlier, he had closed the door. That's when I realized we needed to get the hell out of there. He said, "You have to listen to this song, you'll love it." And it gets worse. He put on this terrifying chant, almost Viking-like, and played it loud, too loud. He was chanting along and we were yelling at him to turn it off, but he didn't listen. The video showed Viking-like people killing others. As we begged him to turn it off because it was scary, he turned to us fast and screamed manically with his teeth showing, his tongue out, and his eyes wide. It was the most distorted face I've ever seen in real life. He didn't look human. No sane person would act this way. My fight-or-flight response isn't great, so I sat there laughing it off, frozen in fear. But my friend? She was in fight mode. She threatened to beat him up if he didn't let us out right then. I ran to the door, but he ran at me, so I froze in front of him. He went to open the door, which was locked. We ran out of the house while he laughed manically, speed walking behind us. We bolted out, and even though I was still trying to laugh it off, it was the beginning of the worst panic attack I've ever had. If my friend hadn't been in fight mode, I don't know what would have happened to us. I know it probably doesn't sound that scary, but it terrified me to my core. The way he changed so quickly, his movements, his mannerisms, the way his face didn't look human anymore, and how naive we were to go in there in the first place because it seemed like an innocent temple. We didn't get many answers from the situation because we were too scared to go back or cause problems, which is stupid. We don't know if he was truly troubled, or if people were actually being hurt, tortured, or having orgies there. It also scared me to think that he knew we were homeless and vulnerable, and that he may have lured us in with the music he heard us playing. On top of that, we were completely tripping because he had laced our stuff. I don't think I can say what my friend believed it was, but it was the worst experience ever. And I highly doubt those girls he mentioned in the beginning were there consensually. This happened about 5 years ago. I was 14 at the time and went over to my best friend's house to party because her parents were on vacation. We will call her Kay. We were the same age and had been best friends since we were 11. Kay's older sister, who was 17, decided to stay at a friend's house because she didn't like being home alone and left us there. She told us not to tell Kay's parents since she was left in charge. Kay and I decided to invite over our other friend, whom we'll call Emmy. At 14, we were all pretty reckless and wanted to get drunk and high, so we called Kay's neighbor Hayden over. He brought some alcohol and weed to the house and we started to drink. Once we decided to smoke, we set everything up and realized we didn't have a lighter. We searched all over the house for 30 minutes and couldn't find one. We also looked for matches but came up empty. Hayden said, "We'll just walk to my house. My mom works in the night shift and isn't there." Now, Hayden's house was about a 15-minute walk away, and it was 3 in the morning, but there were 4 of us, so we thought we were safe. I remember Kay, Emmy, and I were all dressed in booty shorts and crop tops, which made us feel a little uncomfortable walking outside like that. But we were drunk, so we didn't pay it much mind. I left my phone behind since my mom tracked my location. We ended up walking for about 3 minutes when an old Honda Civic drove by us. We stopped and watched it go past, and then it stopped. All 4 of us went silent and looked like deer in headlights. We saw the Honda's reverse lights turn on and immediately started to run. We hid in a neighbor's large bushes and watched the car drive slowly by, with some guy hanging out of the window scanning houses. They eventually sped off and we were a bit freaked out but laughed it off because of the adrenaline. We kept walking for another 2 minutes when we heard brakes squeal. We looked behind us and there it was again, the same car. It looked like it had made a loop around the neighborhood. We saw the headlights turn onto the street we were on and immediately started to run again. Kay and I ran to the left, while Hayden and Emmy ran to the right. I couldn't stop laughing from the adrenaline, but Kay was having a panic attack. We stood there in the bushes of a house and watched the car go by even slower. I had to hold Kay's mouth shut because she wouldn't stop panting and freaking out. The car sped off again, and now Kay and I were alone in the dark, with no Emmy or Hayden in sight. I asked her if she wanted to run back home or just run to Hayden's. She was so freaked out that she couldn't make a decision, so I grabbed her arm and told her to follow me. I was running for my life to Hayden's house with Kay trailing behind me on the verge of tears. Hayden's house was near the entrance and exit of the neighborhood, which was alongside a very busy road. As we approached Hayden's house, the same car was behind us, leaving the neighborhood maybe 200 feet behind us. I saw the headlights hit my body, looked at the car, and immediately dove into Hayden's yard. I told Kay to run to the door. The car still hadn't reached the house yet, so I got up and ran for my life to the door. Hayden and Emmy were waiting for us, but we couldn't get the code for the lock to work. So we pressed our bodies against the wall as the car slowly went by one more time, this time with a guy hanging out of it, screaming something at us. Finally, Hayden opened the door. We calmed down, talked about the situation, and said we would never do that again. We searched the house for a lighter but couldn't find one, so we used matches to smoke instead. We got stoned, went to sleep, and Kay, Emmy, and I walked home very sleepy but cautious around 9 in the morning before Hayden's mom came home. It was the scariest moment of my life, but it was also a thrill. I am the single mother of an obnoxiously adorable 7-year-old boy. This happened when he was 5 years old, in the summer of 2018, and the what-ifs still haunt me. There is a beautiful park on the river that my son and I used to visit often. On this summer evening, we decided to have a picnic in the park for dinner. When we arrived, there were lots of families playing with their children on the playground. We found a spot in the grass near the water, laid down our big purple blanket, and began to eat. I was facing the playground, just people watching, when I noticed a group of 3 children who seemed to be alone. There were 2 boys and 1 girl, and they looked to be between the ages of 9 and 12. You know that bad feeling you get when something just doesn't feel right? These kids gave me that feeling almost instantly. I brushed it off because, well, they were just kids. My son and I were almost done eating and ready to play when dark clouds began rolling in. We live in Florida, and this is standard for a summer evening, so I decided to wait it out and see if it would pass. It did. Everyone cleared the park except for the group of children I mentioned before. At that point, I realized they were definitely alone. I figured they must live nearby. I took my son to the swing, and these kids were just hanging around near us, staring but not saying anything. Then the youngest looking boy came up to my son on the swing and stood in front of it, so my son almost hit him while swinging. He just stood there. I asked him what he was doing, but he did not answer. It made me super uneasy, so I took my son off the swing and over to the jungle gym on the other side of the playground. My son and I played on the other side of the park, and I didn't see the other kids anymore, so I thought they must have left. I sat down on a bench near the jungle gym and watched my son as he played. About 10 minutes later, I looked over toward the parking lot and noticed the same group of kids were still at the park, talking to an older man with a dog. This went on for another 5 minutes, and then the man and the children parted ways. The man walked down the street in the opposite direction, and the children came back to the park and over to the jungle gym where my son was playing. I was still sitting on the bench, which was probably about 10 feet away from the jungle gym, when those kids started hanging around and talking to my son. They were asking him lots of questions like, "How old are you?" and "Where do you go to school?" He was answering while climbing around and didn't seem to be paying much attention. I was watching the other kids the entire time because they gave me an unwavering bad feeling. After a few minutes, they got off the jungle gym and began walking toward the road. I was so fixated on the tops of their heads as they walked away that I didn't realize my son, who was tiny, was walking with them. They were almost to the street when I screamed my son's name, and he turned around and bolted back to me. I asked him where he was going, and he said, "They said they had to show me something." We left immediately. I really don't know if it was sinister or not, but I can't explain the kids trying to lead my son out of the park. I often think about what could have happened if I hadn't been paying attention. Was the old man somehow involved? I spoke with my son about following the stranger danger rule with anyone he doesn't know, even if they are kids like him. We don't play at that park anymore. I drive by that park occasionally and have seen that old man a few times, but I haven't seen those children. I do apologize for the long text, but I've been wanting to share this for a while. This happened years ago when I was in Los Angeles during my freshman year of college. I was 18 years old and walking back to my dorm after an evening class. My dorm wasn't very far from the school building. It was a 5-minute walk down the street. There weren't a lot of students around, but I always took this path back to my place without incident. I had no reason to worry about my surroundings that night. I was about 1 block away from my dorm when I was stopped by 2 individuals, a man and a woman who looked to be in their late 20s. Let's call them Jay and Ann. The street was well lit, so I could see the clipboards and satchels they were carrying. I figured they were recruiters for some club on campus until Jay asked me a peculiar question. "Do you want to know the secret of the universe?" I was taken aback by the question. It wasn't something I'd normally be asked on a Monday night. Being the curious 18-year-old that I was, I entertained his question by saying I didn't know what he was talking about. Jay asked for 5 minutes of my time to elaborate. I ended up listening to him for about 15 minutes as he gave a lecture about finding inner peace, with Anne chiming in occasionally. Eventually, this all led to a discussion about religion, and the so-called secret was about getting into heaven. I wasn't really interested in religion at the time, and still am not, and I was disappointed by their answer. They pushed to continue the conversation, but I insisted that maybe another time and tried to walk away. Anne stepped in front of me and reassured me that this was something I needed to hear. Jay approached right behind me. They had surrounded me. I knew it was time to leave. I tried to hide my discomfort while telling them I needed to get home, but the tremble in my voice didn't help. Anne, with a warm but robotic tone, tried to relax me and offered to drive me home. I had been needlessly accommodating to them up to that point, but I firmly said no to that offer. They both asked where I lived, but I started dodging their questions. I considered running home but worried they might chase me. Sensing my discomfort, they attempted small talk, asking about my studies and how I was enjoying school. Then, a car pulled up next to us. The driver got out to greet Jay and Anne. They knew each other. They offered one more time to drive me home. I repeated my no, this time with desperation in my voice. Jay and Anne looked visibly upset. They talked among themselves, and then Anne and the driver got into the car. Jay approached me again holding a clipboard. Attached was an application form asking for my name, address, and phone number. Jay wanted my information to continue the conversation another day. This felt suspicious, but I was relieved he decided to back off. I gave him a fake address and surname. Earlier in our encounter, I had pulled up my phone, so I figured he would try calling my number to verify my identity. That was one of my blunders that night. I reluctantly provided my number and he did call it. He told me he'd be in touch and then got in the car. They drove away. I felt embarrassed by my lack of common sense throughout the incident. I didn't tell anyone about what happened that night, unsure who those people were or what they were up to. I just wanted to move on. Jay did try to contact me in the following weeks. I ghosted him, blocked his number, and never heard from him again. I ended up taking a different route home for the rest of the year without incident. I never saw Jay or Ann on campus again. This creepy experience happened when I was in high school, and it has stuck with me. I often wonder if it really happened. It's worth mentioning that my childhood home was in the woods, a very secluded area that could be quite eerie at night. Aside from the moon and stars and the lights from our house, it was pitch black. I'd often wonder if anyone was hiding in those woods. My house had lots of windows, allowing anyone outside to see right in at night. Then again, we had a low crime rate, and I never saw any strangers back there. I must have been about 17 years old. It was a Friday night, and my mom had gone out on a date, planning to be out late. My little brother, who was around 12, was having a sleepover with his best friend. I was tasked with making dinner and keeping the kids out of trouble. I expected no issues since they weren't little kids. They could entertain themselves. It was around 9 or 10 p.m. when I was sitting in my bedroom playing World of Warcraft. Suddenly, my brother and his friend burst through my door, out of breath and screaming my name. I asked what was wrong. My brother's friend spoke up, somewhat paraphrased. We saw a man outside. Insert my brother's name. Thought he saw somebody standing in the yard, so we looked out the window. There was a person just standing there. We couldn't see his face, but we think he was looking right at us, and he was dressed in black. We didn't know what to do at first, and then he ran really fast across the yard, and we think he went behind the trees. My brother looked scared and was on the verge of tears, nodding along to what his friend was saying. I had never known my brother or his friend to make up stories, so I was scared. However, I didn't think it was wise to go outside with a flashlight, yelling hello and expecting a response from whoever was lurking in our yard. I asked them if they were sure they saw a person and if it could have been an animal like a fox, coyote, or deer. They insisted it was a person, staring right at them before running away and hiding. I called my mom to ask what I should do. We weren't too fond of the police, so I wanted to avoid that if possible. My mom was annoyed that I interrupted her date. She thought the kids were lying and telling fake stories and told me to just keep an eye out before hanging up. The kids insisted they weren't lying and wanted to stay in my bedroom until my mom returned. I kept peeking out the windows, but thankfully never saw anyone. I believed them, but I also had my doubts. They seemed genuinely scared, and I didn't think they would make it up. Yet I couldn't shake the thought that maybe they just thought they saw someone, but it was nothing more than a shadow or an animal. They were adamant they knew what they saw. A man dressed in black clothes, and they couldn't see his face. My mind had played tricks on me in those woods before, but I decided to give them the benefit of the doubt. I was spooked for a while after that. When my mom arrived home and I recounted the story, she laughed it off and tried to comfort the kids so they could go to bed. After that night, I made extra sure to lock all the doors and windows. I used to live in a townhouse, a duplex by myself with my dog and 2 cats near a train station. There were often commuters who parked outside my place and passed by throughout the day and night. Occasionally, I had cigarettes or other items stolen from my front veranda. Once, my next-door neighbor's ex-boyfriend even came to my door, claiming a hitman was after him and that he had a gun. but none of this scared me like the night I was watched. My dog lived indoors, and I would take him out for a last pee before bed. My backyard light was broken and too high to change the bulb, so I always took him out the front. That night, around 11 p.m., I let him outside. It was a hot summer evening, and I was mindlessly standing on the footpath when I saw movement across the road from me. Out of nowhere, a man appeared, walking diagonally away from me. I thought it was odd because I hadn't seen him come from the other direction. I kept thinking about it. He had come from outside a house that was being renovated, and I knew the owners weren't living there. I wondered if he was planning to steal something. I continued to watch down the road as he turned the corner. Suddenly, I saw his head pop around the corner to see if I was still outside. This gives me the absolute creep, so I grab my dog and go inside. I turned off all the lights and went upstairs to my bedroom, which faced the street. I figured I would keep an eye on my neighbor's house and call the police if he returned. Peering through the blinds covering the sliding doors leading to a small balcony, I saw a dark figure walk down from the corner and down my street. He moved toward the house across the road, but then I lost sight of him behind a tree that obscured my view. Moments later, he reappeared, stopping at the top of my driveway. He stood there like Jason Voorhees. I kid you not. His arms were out by his sides and his legs were apart in an unnatural stance, as if he were preparing for something, like he wanted to come and kill me. My heart raced so hard I could barely hear. I stood there slack-jawed, staring at this would-be assailant when one of my cats came to see what was happening. The cat slid its body between the blinds and window, further opening them, and I saw the man looking up towards me. Surely he must see me. If he did, he didn't seem fazed. He started walking down my driveway, undeterred and fixated. I lost sight of him beneath the balcony and awning. By this time, my eyes were watering from fear, and tears streamed down my face. I didn't know what to do, so I sat on my bed. I picked up my mobile and dialed my dad, who lived a suburb away. He answered, and I whispered what was happening. He said he would be there as soon as he could. Lying down in bed, I remained as still as possible, tears rolling down my cheeks. I was paralyzed with pure fear, not knowing what the man was doing downstairs or if he could get in. What if I hadn't locked the doors? And then it dawned on me, why am I lying here in the dark crying? I needed to turn on a light. So I did. What felt like a lifetime, but it was probably just a couple of minutes later, my dad arrived, armed with an umbrella. I lived in Australia, so no guns, but a knife would have been more appropriate. I stayed on the phone with him while he searched outside for the man. He was gone. Maybe my turning on the light scared him off. I called the police, who said I should have called sooner. Of course I should have. I don't know why I didn't. They came out with a sniffer dog but didn't find him either. I don't know what he wanted, but for a good year after that I was terrified living there. I'm still a scaredy cat, but reading others' stories makes me realize I'm not alone. We can all learn from these experiences so we know what to do if something scary happens. I am a teenager who helps my dad out on the allotment. For those who don't know, an allotment is like a mini farm where you can plant veggies or keep animals like chickens or rabbits. Recently, I had a creepy experience that still creeps me out. One evening, my dad said we needed to go to the allotment to feed our chickens because he had forgotten to do it earlier that day. It was around 8 p.m. when I agreed, and we drove the 15 minutes to get there. By the time we arrived, it was already dark outside. Not pitch black, but definitely dark. I opened the gates to the allotment and let my dad drive in and then closed them. Just as I was about to close the gate, I noticed a black car parked outside. The car belonged to a guy who used to be on good terms with my dad, but their friendship had faded over time. My dad mentioned that this guy had become increasingly mentally unstable after a divorce, which resulted in him losing custody of his kids. Now he lived on the allotment and even slept there. While there were about 20 other allotments in the area, it was just me, my dad, and this guy that night. After my dad parked, we got out and started retrieving the chicken feed from the trunk. While my dad was busy, I glanced at the ex-friend's allotment and saw him staring at us. It was dark, so I could only make out his shadow, but I knew he was watching. A gut feeling kicked in, but I decided to ignore it. We fed the chickens and were about to leave when my dad remembered something he had to get from the shed at the end of the allotment. I was going to follow him in, but felt a strong urge to wait outside instead. As I stood there, I turned to face our gate and noticed it was opening. At first, I didn't see anyone, but then I spotted the guy trying to sneak into our allotment. He locked eyes with me before quietly closing the gate and disappearing. I was frozen. Instead of saying anything to my dad, I didn't want to scare him. This wasn't a horror movie after all. When my dad finally emerged from the shed, we were ready to leave. Suddenly, we heard a sound that resembled an axe hitting wood repeatedly. Something felt off. We quickly walked to our car, started it, and made our way to the gate. I hopped out of the car to open the gate. As I was closing it, I saw something that terrified me. The guy was standing about 20 meters away, staring directly at me. I couldn't make out any details in the darkness, but I could see he was holding something in his hand. Then, without warning, he moved and disappeared into some bushes. My dad got out of the car to lock the gate, glanced at the bushes through the closed gate, and hurried back to the car. We drove off, shaken. I asked my dad if he saw what I saw. He confirmed he had spotted the guy hiding in the bushes, squatting and watching us, holding something that looked like an axe or a knife. We left, terrified but trying to laugh it off, knowing how close we had come to something truly dangerous. A few days later, we returned to the allotment around the same time, 8 p.m. We saw the guy's car parked there and knew we needed to be quick about feeding the chickens. Everything seemed fine until my dad suddenly stopped me and whispered, "He's there in the bushes." My heart dropped. I asked where he was, and my dad said we had about 5 seconds to make it to the car. We quickly ran to the vehicle, got inside, and locked the doors. For a brief moment, I caught a glimpse of him. He was holding an axe, clearly trying to sneak up on us. I don't know what's up with this guy, but I think he wants to harm us. Maybe even kill us. Now, this is something I really want to talk about to ensure everyone stays cautious and level-headed at all times. For context, I lived in the middle of nowhere in Canada. It was an old town with quite a few abandoned buildings due to a lack of residents. My friends and I were tired of the lack of entertainment options, so we explored these abandoned buildings. Before the experience I'm about to share, nothing too crazy had ever happened to us. Occasionally, we would see a small amount of blood-like liquid, and once we saw a pentagram on the ground left by someone who had been in a house before us, but nothing too alarming. That all changed the last time I went exploring abandoned buildings. When I was younger, I used to go to a daycare that was part of a mental hospital. Weird combination, I know. It shut down due to a lack of patients and not enough children attending the daycare. A few years ago, I decided to return there with my friends. For context, I was 15 at the time, and most of my friends were around the same age. When we arrived, the scene was like something out of a movie. There was a fog, it was dark, and there was a light drizzle of rain. We reached the main gate, which was padlocked shut. We helped each other climb over it, making a lot of noise as we laughed and joked, unaware of what was coming. We shone our flashlights around the small play area and park. Despite having decent flashlights, our visibility was limited. We decided to go into the decaying building. Glass and dirt crunched under our feet as we stepped into the daycare section. There were old Lego pieces, wood chips from broken furniture, and torn dolls and toys scattered around. The deeper we went, the more silent we became until all we could hear was the crunch of dirt under our feet. I found some crayons in a plastic container in the corner of the room and walked over to pick them up. Suddenly, we heard a loud crash coming from behind a metal door that led to the psych ward part of the building. We all looked at each other. There were 5 of us, and most of my friends were bold and cocky. My friend Brian suggested we check it out. Personally, I wasn't fond of the idea, but with my friends, declining wasn't an option. We gathered at the door and tried to open it. It was rusted to the floor and we had to heave to get it open. The metallic smell and must became stronger as we entered, mixed with another scent I couldn't identify at the time. Brian led the group and we shone our flashlights in all directions. The hallway was narrow with metal doorways on either side, some open. I felt slightly claustrophobic and found it hard to breathe. Brian shone his flashlight into a room and suddenly recoiled. We all stopped. "What is it?" I asked. "I thought I saw someone, but it's fine now." He sounded uncertain. At the time, I thought he was just trying to scare us, but looking back, I think he was serious. We continued walking deeper into the psych ward. Another friend quickly told us to stop. We stood still and listened. In the distance, we could hear the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the hallway. We exchanged nervous glances, fear clear in everyone's eyes. Brian pressed forward toward the sounds. For a moment, we thought about turning back without him, wondering if some ghost or creature was in the building, but we couldn't abandon him. The further we went, the more I felt like we were being watched. Finally, we entered a room on the right that smelled like rotting meat. In front of us was a dead deer, its innards spilled all over the floor and staining the concrete. One of my friends, who had a weak stomach, vomited. That's when we heard whispering. Brian shone his flashlight into a corner, and we saw a man standing with his head down. He had short hair, a bright green t-shirt stained with what looked like blood, and torn beige pants. He had no socks and his feet were damaged. He twitched sporadically and continued to mumble even after we noticed him. We stared at him for a solid 30 seconds before he moved. He looked up with a haunting grin that sent shivers down our spines. "You guys here for the feast?" he said, each word varying in inflection and energy. That was enough to push us over the edge. We bolted out of the room and ran back to the daycare center. The door was still open and we tried to slam it shut, but it was heavy and rusted. It took 3 of us pulling with all our strength to close it. Just before it shut, I saw the silhouette of the man watching us, his white teeth the only feature visible. We sat behind the metal door, catching our breath and confirming with each other that we had all seen the same thing. After a moment of labored breathing, we heard a light tapping on the door. That was when we decided it was time to leave. We ran out of the building and didn't stop until we got home. A year later, the police conducted a routine search of the area and found the man. He had been a patient at the psych ward before it closed and had escaped from the facility he was transferred to. He survived by eating the wildlife around the complex. When the cops caught him, he was suffering from several diseases and conditions from eating raw meat. His mental state had deteriorated further. There were rumors that he had killed someone in the forest while looking for food, but nothing was confirmed. In the end, be careful, especially in dangerous places like abandoned buildings. And to the creepy man, let's not meet again. This is truly the scariest and most horrible thing that has ever happened to me. I have never been so petrified in my life. To this day, I still do not know who this man was, what he was trying to do, or if he is still where I saw him. I apologize for the length of the geographical description, but I want everyone to understand just how secluded I was when this happened, and how badly it could have ended if it had not been for my parents. I was back home for the summer for the first time in a year after starting university. Our home is just outside of a small town surrounded by forests. There was also a small man-made lake, diverged from a river that ran for miles through the forest, and split into a few streams east of the lake. Near my home there was a narrow grassy path that led to the river following a stream. It was a long walk, but one I often took as a child. I knew the forest well and knew where to cut through dense trees to meet the stream. The path I followed always led me off the main trail, which gradually turned northwest away from the stream, and then sharply turned west after several miles. At that point, the stream would be hidden deep in the forest. I would continue walking north, following the stream through the trees to reach the river, and then follow the river west to get to the lake. It was easy to get lost in this forest because the terrain was uneven, rising and falling, leaving you surrounded by dense trees. I had spent many days wandering there alone or with my dad over 18 years, and had never seen another person in the forest. I went there twice that summer, both times alone, sort of. The first time I left in the morning and walked along the path away from the stream to the sharp bend, then cut back into the forest. I reached the stream after about an hour. While running my hands in the water, I heard a bell ringing from far away coming from the north. It rang fervently and periodically, which I found strange. I listened carefully and wondered if it was a lost hunting dog. I started moving toward the sound, thinking, yeah, I know I'd be the first to die in a horror movie, but I was heading north anyway, so what's the harm? I realized it couldn't have been an animal. The bell sounded too heavy to be attached to a collar due to how clear and resonant it was. I kept moving, but the bell started moving away from me and then stopped completely after about 5 minutes. The stream wasn't large or powerful enough to carry an object like a bell enclosed in a tin or something, and the river was still too far. I considered every possibility, but nothing explained the sound except the obvious conclusion. It had to be a person. That thought made me uncomfortable, so I pushed it out of my mind and continued walking as usual. Then I found a badger, a dead one, carefully decapitated. It had clearly been done with a knife. The body was fairly fresh. It was still limp and didn't have a smell yet. The wound was crawling with maggots, but I knew that happened soon after exposure. The bell sound had been following the stream just as I had. That meant the badger was likely put there, possibly killed and definitely decapitated, while I was walking in that direction. I wasn't sure, but the thought disturbed me. Nothing else happened that day. A week later, I went back for the second time that summer, and the last time ever. I left home at around 6 o'clock in the evening. I made it to the stream and then walked to the river in about an hour. Because it was getting late and starting to rain heavily, I decided to head back the way I came. The sun set at around 9 o'clock. I walked as fast as I could, the sound of rain on the trees loud and surreal. I was trotting with my head down through the clearest, most open part of the forest when I bumped into something heavy. The smell was sickening. It was the decomposing body of the badger, with its head tied to its front paws. The way it was bound made that area look like a ham, and it swung from a tree like an obscene, putrid display. Green liquid dripped from it and the stench was unbearable. I started gagging as mucus-like fluid dripped onto my hair. It was repulsive. At first, I just stared at it in shock. Then I began to fidget uncontrollably, feeling as though I was drenched in the creature's juices. I was already soaked from the rain and my senses were overwhelmed and confused. It felt like a bucket of ice-cold water had been thrown over me when I realized that I had walked the same path to get to the river. Someone had strung up the body after I had passed it on my way there. Someone knew I would see it. So, was someone watching me and running around the forest? Were the faint sounds of branches breaking around me not animals? I looked around and started jogging. I was half running, half walking away from the stream, heading back toward the path when I heard the bell again. I called my dad while running and told him to meet me at the part of the path where it sharply turned west. It was the closest point to me, and I urged him to get there as fast as possible, explaining that someone was in the forest. I can't explain the feeling I had. It was as if I had just emptied my intestines and stomach. I literally felt the hairs on my neck stand up even though I was soaked. It was dark, and I jogged as fast as I could. Panic set in because the path was still a bit too far away to feel safe. The rain was still falling, and every sound was muffled. It felt as if everything was further away than ever before. The bell rang much longer this time, on and off, and at one point it felt like it was surrounding me. The fear, combined with my compromised hearing and the fact that I couldn't breathe properly, made me lose my sense of direction slightly. I was heading southwest automatically, but I wasn't sure what I was even doing. I was breathing like a horse, coughing and wheezing, almost crying out loud like a toddler. I tripped over leaves and twigs, trying to stay on the phone with my mom who was on her way with my dad. I kept hearing sounds but couldn't tell what they were. My mom was screaming on the phone, telling me they were on the path and that I needed to run. She said my dad had gotten out and he was heading east from the path bend. Terrified, I went into survival mode, half running and half speed walking because I was out of breath. Then I heard branches breaking and, for the first time, distinct footsteps coming from deeper in the forest. The bell was ringing louder. Against my better judgment, I looked over my shoulder. That's when I saw him, a tall figure creeping in my direction at the edge of the clearing, ringing the bell slowly in front of his stomach. I could tell he was staring straight at me. I don't know if I had some hidden sprinting ability or if adrenaline gave me superhuman powers, but when I tell you I ran for my life, I didn't look back once. I screamed as loudly as I could. I lied, shouting, "I'm on the phone with the police and they're on the path. And Dad, I can see you, I'm here." I wanted to scream, "Dad, please, where are you?" but kept that to myself. I felt like something awful was about to happen and that the man was right behind me. I kept telling myself not to look back. Gasping, wheezing, and crying, I screamed for my dad. I felt shivers running up my neck before my mind switched off and my body took over. I just ran. I even dropped my bag, only realizing I didn't have it when I was in the car. My phone felt like my only lifeline. Reality began to blur as my legs moved on their own. I didn't know if the man was still following me. I could only hear my heart pounding in my ears and the bell. Finally, I heard my dad shouting my name. The intonation of his voice told me he could see me. I lunged at him as soon as we reached each other. My dad had heard the bell too, and my mom still on the phone and could hear it in the background. She was waiting with the car ready to leave as fast as possible. I grew up in the wooded country of Illinois, on a short dead-end street more than 10 miles from the nearest town. There were 7 houses spread out over large 2.5-acre wooded lots or larger. There were no large wild animals like bears in the area, and people rarely passed by. In fact, during the 20 years I lived there, I never encountered any lost travelers or large animals wandering around. When I was a young girl in my early teens, I had a good friend named Terry who lived next door. He was a few years older than me. Terry was allowed to stay out later than I was, and sometimes after he got home late, he'd throw rocks from the gravel area outside at my window to chat. My bed was right next to the window. I would open it and we'd whisper stories and talk for a bit. My second-story window faced our backyard, and his house was to the side. I could see it over the shrub trees and walking path leading to his driveway. I often knew if he was out, the light would be on by the side door, or if he was home, the light would be off. One summer night, I had my window open when I heard a car pulling into Terry's driveway. I was probably 14 years old, and it was around midnight. I heard Terry getting out of the car and talking to his friends. Soon they drove away. I softly called out as loud as I could without waking my parents, asking Terry to stop by and chat. But he didn't respond. He probably didn't hear me. So I came up with the not-so-brilliant idea to sneak outside and scare him. I had spent years in the woods learning how to blend in and be silent. As kids, we often snuck around to scare each other. I silently crept down from the second floor out the back garage door and into the yard below my window. Terry's house was just off to the side, through the gravel area and a well-worn path through the woods about 25 feet long. My parents had put in a gravel pit behind the house, probably because nothing grew due to the shade from the oak trees. There were 14-inch oak rounds laid down unevenly like stepping stones in the gravel, and stepping off them would give me away with the crunch of gravel. I carefully crossed the log rounds facing Terry's house. My eyes adjusted to the dark, but I didn't see him. I heard the door to his house close and the light turned off, signaling that he had gone inside, likely to bed. I waited for a while and thought I saw something move in the woods between our houses, but not on the path. If someone didn't use the path, they'd have to walk through the wild rose and raspberry bushes with painful thorns. So I thought it was strange that Terry would be in the woods, but maybe he wanted to scare me like I had planned to do to him. I saw something human-sized and dark moving slowly through the woods, pausing every once in a while like me. It was coming closer. I could definitely see it, but it was strange. It wasn't walking toward my window to talk. I hunched down and waited in silence, thinking I could still startle him. I thought it was Terry, maybe trying to scare me because he saw me sneak out. The figure moved slowly, but I would lose sight of it in the foliage. It seemed to be stalking, checking every few feet, hiding behind trees. After waiting for a bit, I whispered one last time, but Terry didn't answer. I grew bored of hiding and quietly tiptoed back to my garage door, slipping inside and locking it behind me. I snuck back upstairs to my room above the area where I had just been standing. My window was still open and I heard someone walking around the yard below. I whispered for Terry out the window again, but he didn't respond. Then I heard a loud grunt and the sound of something falling into the window well beneath my window. It was loud enough to send a shock of fear through me, but not loud enough to wake my parents. If you're not familiar with a window well, it's a semicircle hole about 3 or 4 feet deep, reinforced with metal, to allow natural light into a basement window below ground level. There was no way Terry could have fallen into our window well. We had been playing games like hide and seek around the neighborhood for years. and we knew the locations of everyone's window wells and the paths through the woods like the back of our hands. The sound was definitely human, not like an animal, and I could hear whatever it was quietly pull itself out without thrashing around. That's when I realized this wasn't a game. Someone or something was out there, and it wasn't Terry. I tried to look outside, but the window screen blocked my view, so I couldn't lean out far enough to see next to the wall of our house. Then I heard the crunch of rocks as whatever it was stepped on the gravel. Terry would have known to avoid the gravel, and he would never step on it because he was as quiet as I was. I held my breath, waiting. I probably stayed there face pressed against the screen for about half an hour, though it felt much longer. I never heard it leave, but I eventually grew tired and fell asleep on my bed next to the window. There are a few things I'm certain of. It wasn't Terry. I asked him later, and he said he had gone to bed that night when he got home. He also had no reason to lie. I'm pretty sure it wasn't one of our neighbors. We had only 2 other houses with kids, and those houses were far apart. There were no large animals in the area. We did have deer, but they were hunted and stayed away from the houses. Our dog also scared them off. Stranger in the woods, let's never meet. I've told this story to my roommates, who were from the same town, and I've talked about it a few times with people who were there, but that's about it. I don't like to talk about it much because, inevitably, someone always says, "Really, we should go try and find it again," and I really don't want to. I've looked for it on a map a few times, but I can't find it. Though my male friend who drove there that night swears he has the directions memorized through Google's aerial maps. Anyway, I'm originally from a major city in southern Ohio. Outside the city, there are several smaller townships. One of these is known as the more country bumpkin redneck or grit part of town. It's not even in the same county, but it's still part of the general area my city is in. In the woods, there's a legend of Hell's Church, supposedly an old church that burned down where Satanists now perform rituals, or a satanic church that burned down due to a ritual, depending on who you ask. There are a number of Hell's Church myths in Ohio in different places, but this one was closest to us. Some of my guy friends decided they wanted to be ghost hunters and check out haunted places around where we lived. We were juniors in high school, and while we all obviously thought it was just stupid, we found it funny to go out and scare ourselves. Plus, most of us had cars or driver's licenses by now, so we were enjoying the newfound freedom. I'm a scaredy cat about most stuff like this, but I was the most tomboyish girl in the group. I always kind of wanted to hang with the guys, and some of the girls in the group who I was closer to were going, so I didn't want to look like a loser or a scaredy cat. So one night in November, we decided to go out and try to find this church. We had actually been to this location once before that fall, but one of my friends had a curfew, so after exploring an old barn and railroad tracks on a bridge nearby, we left. We hadn't found the church, supposedly just a chimney at this point, to our disappointment and my mild relief. We took 2 cars out there, heading past more populated parts of our city to this wooded area. I can't honestly tell you how we got there, but I know it's off a state highway, then an abandoned access road past some old warehouse, and down a dirt road. Once you're on the dirt road, there's a thicker part early on where we parked the cars off to the side. We did this because the road thins out and becomes impossible to drive down. And also, someone clearly owns the land. Later down the road, there's a no trespassing sign. I'm sure a lot of kids come here, so it didn't seem odd to me that they'd want to block the place off. At the time, I barely thought twice about it. We got out of the cars and started walking down the dirt road, wandering off the path sometimes to check out barns or clearings where we thought the chimney might be. At first, it was just scary because it was dark and old, but then the barns started getting weirder. They were filled with strange spray-painted symbols and nonsense, but that wasn't what bothered us. We figured whoever was there before us did it, which I still 100% believe. What bothered us more were the dead owls, which looked like they had been opened up, though they were dried out and decomposed by the time we got there, thank goodness, and other animal remains. I was grossed out, but we all kind of agreed that these probably came from the same teenagers trying to fake a satanic ritual. Or maybe the animals had gotten trapped in the fallen apart barn and died there, to be picked apart by other animals. My friends were now hardcore trying to find this stupid chimney, so they kept heading through the trees into clearings. The other two girls and I stayed back by the tree line for most of it, getting a little more nervous and a little irritated by the lack of success. As we continued, we found a bike by the tree line, a small one, like something a 12-year-old might ride. That was a little creepy, but fine, whatever. Probably belonged to someone who owned the land. We decided to go a little further, and soon enough we found another bike. This one was older, a little rusted, but still too small. We didn't talk too much about the bike, muttering that it was probably still nothing. One or two of the guys tried to make it sound sinister, saying, "These kids probably got murdered," or something like that, but no one really bought into it. At this point, we'd been out there for about 2 hours, and it was getting really late. Plus, I think we were all a little more creeped out than we wanted to admit. We decided to head back to the cars, and I was feeling relieved, happy to be heading back to my house and out of there. But things never work out that way, do they? By the cars, we saw a road that went straight up a hill through the trees. At the start of it, there was a big metal gate with a road closed sign, which we had seen before, but for some reason it had never occurred to us to try going up the road. We debated at the gate with an even split between those who wanted to venture up and those who didn't. I absolutely didn't, but eventually we decided to go up just to see. Both of the drivers wanted to go, so there wasn't much we could do about it. We climbed over the gate and started up the hill where an old paved road was cracked and crumbled under our feet. It was clearly once a real asphalt road, but now it was in poor condition. In addition to the road being broken up, there were a bunch of trees that had been felled across the path, purposely blocking it from any cars. Some of us were seriously questioning if we should be doing this, arguing that someone obviously didn't want us there, but we were teased for being afraid and decided to keep going. I couldn't see where the road would end because it was so dark. We had a few flashlights, but they weren't helping much, and the trees made it hard to see. The road was also super steep, so all we could really see was up, with only a little moonlight peeking through the trees. All of a sudden, though, we reached the end. The trees opened up and we had come off the incline to a flat field. And holy cow, what a sight it was. The flat field had tall prairie grass on either side, probably 2 or 3 feet high and pretty uniform. The path we were on split the large clearing down the center, leading through the grass to a cul-de-sac with 3 buildings. 2 looked like farmhouses, and there was 1 barn-like building. They were made of wood, and while they may have been painted at one point, they mostly looked weathered and stripped by time. I saw this and I was done. I wanted to leave, but, of course, some of my friends said we had to check out the buildings. At this point, I finally put my foot down, as did the other 2 girls and one of our guy friends who decided this was enough for him. He was our valedictorian, so maybe he was just smarter. So the three guys who wanted to go to the buildings told us to just wait there. While we didn't want to be in this field out in the open, we decided we couldn't just leave them. At this point, we turned off our flashlights because the moonlight was so strong. The three of them took off down the little path, and the four of us who remained stayed together, complaining about how stupid our friends were and making small talk. None of us said it, but we were all looking toward the grass every now and then, worried something might jump out. It was just so creepy, this abandoned little settlement. It felt like our friends were gone forever. We saw them get to a building and go inside. It was unlocked, I guess. We could see the flicker of their flashlight lights in the windows, and I remember feeling so tense. It was like watching a horror movie in real life. After maybe 10 minutes, though it could have been just a tense 5, we saw our guy friends coming toward us, lightly jogging, looking afraid for the first time all night. "You idiots went inside," I said, pissed off at them. One of my friends just looked at us, and I'll never forget it. It was full of bikes, just bikes chained to the walls. We didn't believe them at first, waiting for them to say they were kidding, but they insisted. They said it was like they were just storing a bunch of bikes there, most of them smaller. They looked afraid, and as much as I didn't want to believe them, I did. They weren't the type of guys to pull a prank for this long. By then, we all agreed we needed to get the heck out of there, so we started down the hill, hurrying as best we could. All of a sudden, about halfway down the field, we saw a car's headlights near the bottom of the hill, about where our cars were. We saw them pass slowly, and we knew someone was down there looking for us. Since it was so far off the beaten path, we figured it was one of two things: the cops, and we were going to be in trouble for trespassing, or the people who owned the land or these houses, and they were either going to A, call the cops, or B, murder us. We knew the road wasn't that long, so they'd be turning around, circling back soon enough. And since our cars were there, they'd probably wait for us. We were all whispering about this as we picked up the pace, sprinting down the hill as fast as we could. I'm not a good runner, but I was hauling butt, getting down as fast as I could, practically hurtling over the fallen trees. Once we reached the bottom of the hill, we didn't see any headlights, but we knew they couldn't be far away. "Get in the damn cars," one of our friends yelled, and we fumbled with the doors like in a horror movie, just too nervous to get into the cars. We got in, and just as we started the cars up, we saw the headlights speeding down the road, a giant black truck roaring up behind us. The truck seemed larger than life, raised up off the ground. The whole thing was terrifying. But what was extra terrifying was that we couldn't see who was driving in the dark with the headlights blinding us. We peeled out of there, putting the pedal to the metal. This truck was still following us, getting closer, almost like it was trying to run us off the road. We were all screaming, looking back at the truck, trying to get away. Once we reached the highway, we switched lanes, trying to escape. Luckily, we were in sedans, so it was easier for us to weave in and out of cars. But the truck was still chasing us. We were in 2 different lanes, but didn't want to get too separated from our friends. The passengers in both cars were texting back and forth, trying to make a plan. It took us about 15 minutes to lose the truck. I'm not sure if the distance was too much for them or if they turned around. But once we got to a big shopping center area, we ducked off the road into a Sonic parking lot. We sat in our cars for a while, watching to make sure we wouldn't get snuck up on before getting out to grab food and talk. Everyone, even the guys who had tried to act tough the whole time, was pretty shaken up. It took us a while to settle down enough to head home. As much as we talked it over, we just couldn't figure out what had happened. Eventually, we all went home during what was a pretty silent car ride, exhaustion and lingering fear taking over. We didn't talk about it again for a long time, and we never called the police, which honestly, as an adult now, I feel like we should have. I don't think about it often, only during the fall, really. But when I do think about it, I ask myself, who chased us? Why was that town abandoned? Who owned those bikes, and where are they now? Edit a year later. This post is archived now, so I can't comment on it, but I think I may have a lead on this, so I figured I would post that. Someone messaged me with their guess on the location, and while I don't think it was correct, I searched a little for Hell's Church on a haunted Ohio site and reread the part of it being by an exit ramp for Route 32 in Batavia. My guess is that we may have turned near JCM Equipment Management, and then taken either Ross or Lookout Drive into the woods. The only thing is, I can't make out a clearing in the woods, though between Ross and Rosebush, there does seem to be a building or two. Still trying to find it from time to time. I'm still on the case. When I was 14, I was asked to babysit my 3 younger cousins, aged 8, 4, and 1, in an extremely rural and mountainous part of Pennsylvania. My aunt and uncle had a wedding to attend over an hour away, and wouldn't be back until very late. Their house was on a steep mountainside, with their back deck having a 15-foot drop onto a rocky hill that led down to a river. Their nearest neighbors were about a half-mile away. The closest main road was a mile away, and at night there were no lights to be seen around. Essentially, it was in the middle of nowhere, and you had to know exactly where you were going to find it. You wouldn't just accidentally end up there. My aunt and uncle left us some pizza and their cell phone number next to the landline. This was the early 2000s, and I didn't have a cell phone, but even if I did, I wouldn't get reception there anyway, and headed out. The baby was already asleep. The 4-year-old wasn't feeling well and was quietly watching TV in the living room as he dozed off, and the 8-year-old was playing Guitar Hero with me up on the loft. The loft overlooked the living room to the left, where I could keep an eye on the 4-year-old, and there was a large window that overlooked the driveway to the right. This description of the driveway is an important detail to the story. The road that led to their house ran straight into their forked driveway. It was a dead-end road, with the house being as far as you could go. If you went left, you would reach a large open carport where my aunt and uncle and anyone who ever visited parked. The right driveway led down a very short but steep hill to a large leveled area, and ended against the garage door that opened to the basement of the house. This area wasn't used as a garage, but served as my uncle's man cave, where he spent most of his time. Right beside the garage door was a normal door with a window, so you could see right inside. This driveway was exclusively used by the kids as a play area, because it was the only flat space on the property. Being on a mountainside, there wasn't much room to safely play otherwise. No cars ever drove down there as there were too many toys and bikes in the way, and friends and family knew this. It was about 10 p.m., pitch black outside, and there was no moon to light the area. My cousin and I were still playing Guitar Hero when headlights caught the corner of my eye. These weren't my aunt's minivan headlights. They were huge truck headlights with those roof lights you often see on Jeeps or other off-road trucks. Not only that, the truck was going down the right driveway, the kids' play area. This was not my aunt and uncle, and it wasn't anyone they knew. Panic and dread filled me. I was a small teenage girl, alone in an isolated house on a mountain at night with 3 children in my care. In a terrified voice, I asked my cousin, "Who was that? Jake, do you know whose truck that is?" He looked panicked too. "No, I've never seen that truck before," he replied. I quickly ushered him downstairs, still unsure of what to do. but the two little ones were sleeping down there and I wanted to make sure they were safe. I checked on the baby and grabbed the phone to call 911. Then I started to hear the metal garage door being shaken violently. No one ever opened that garage door. More panic filled me. I heard them try the door beside it, the metal doorknob jiggling. No one was knocking. They weren't trying to see if my uncle was there. The lights were out. It was dark down there. They knew no one was there. They were definitely breaking in. The door leading to the basement steps was right next to the phone, so I could clearly hear everything. I quickly turned the little lock on the doorknob just in case they made it inside. My heart was practically jumping out of my chest. I was talking to the 911 dispatcher as my 8-year-old cousin clung to my arm. The operator was calm and trying to reassure me, but I knew it would be at least 30 minutes before a police officer could get up there, assuming they didn't get completely lost on the mountainside in the dark. I just kept thinking, we are doomed, we are dead. This is how I die. The operator asked for the number my aunt and uncle had left me so she could have another dispatcher call them to let them know what was happening. I turned around to grab the paper with the number on it, and to my absolute horror, I saw a man peering through the large sliding glass door. A huge, burly man who had to have been about 6 foot 4 inches tall, with long, scraggly red hair and a big, bushy red beard. What made it even worse was that he was grinning at me, grinning in a way that still scares me to this day. Meanwhile, I must have looked like a terrified deer in the headlights. I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. There was a second man behind him, but I couldn't see him clearly. I have no idea what he looked like, but he was just as tall, though a bit more lanky than the larger man at the sliding glass door. I screamed, "Oh God, they're here!" And before the 911 operator could say anything, my 8-year-old cousin said, "Mr. Jim." His voice was very confused. It wasn't like my cousin was happy or even relieved to see him. I asked, "You know who that is?" But before my cousin could answer, I turned my attention back to the man at the door. "I'm on the phone with the police," I shouted. I'm grateful he didn't try that door because I don't think it was locked. The man stared at me hard for a moment, his eyebrows furrowed as if deciding what to do next, but then he just backed away into the darkness. What seemed like an eternity later, I saw the truck lights back out of the driveway and then head back down the road until they disappeared. I was still terrified, and so was my cousin. He had only met that guy a few times, an acquaintance of his dad. It wasn't like he was a close family friend, and obviously he went down the wrong driveway. Visitors never go down that way. The 911 operator asked for a description of the man, then told me they had gotten in touch with my aunt and uncle, and they were on their way home. She stayed on the phone with me until a police officer showed up a little while later to make sure the men were gone. The officer stayed with us until my aunt and uncle arrived so they could ask them some questions. My uncle was furious, not at me for calling them home early, but at this Mr. Jim guy. He muttered something like, "I'm going to mess him up." My aunt was mad at my uncle and told him to tell Jim to never come back again. I didn't know at the time, but my uncle had a drug problem. I don't know what Mr. Jim or his accomplice were doing, or what they would have done if I hadn't been on the phone with the police. But that grin was not friendly. It was sinister. And again, he had to have known my uncle wasn't there because the basement was dark. He would have seen through the windowed basement door. He had also tried lifting the garage door, something not even my uncle did. He intended to break into the basement. There's no other explanation. I never babysat for them again, and I don't think I ever even went back up there because not long after, my aunt divorced my uncle and moved out. So, Mr. Jim, the grinning, burly mountain man who tried to break into the house where I was babysitting, let's not meet again. This happened about a year ago when I was 26. I'm a female and tend to be friendly to most people. I'm not a tiny woman, 5'7" tall and heavier, but I still get quite a lot of attention for some reason. On this particular day, I was headed home from work. I worked in a warehouse at the time, and I was wearing old yoga pants and an old bleach-stained shirt, no makeup, and my hair up. It's summer in South Carolina, and it's hot. I basically looked as unattractive as I possibly could. I had just moved into a new apartment and was planning to build myself some shelves out of wood and cinder blocks. I decided to swing by Lowe's after work to get the materials I needed. I grabbed one of those large pallet carts and started collecting the things I needed. I'm strong and pride myself on being able to build things, lift things, and generally just do stuff on my own. As I was putting cinder blocks on my cart, a Lowe's employee walked up to me. I smiled politely at him. He was maybe 5'11" tall with wireframe glasses, a sparse mustache, yellowing teeth, balding but fit. Probably in his 40s, although I'm a bad judge of age. He offered to help. "No thanks, I've got this," I said. He smiled widely and said, "Oh no, it's okay, this is what I'm paid to do." Then he literally took the cart from me and started pushing it. He began asking me a bunch of questions which seemed pretty standard at first. "What are you building? What do you need?" I answered but kept my responses short. I was definitely getting the vibe that he was trying to pick me up. Then he started telling me about how he was an ex-Marine, his time in the service, how he stays fit and in shape, and how strong he was. Then, I kid you not, he flexed for me like, "Who are you, Johnny Bravo?" At this point, I was getting annoyed but not creeped out yet. I just wanted to grab my stuff and check out. We reached the lumber section and I started to grab a board. "No, I can grab that," he insisted. "Nah, it's fine, I can do this on my own." He grinned again. "No, ma'am," in a sing-songy voice. Okay, whatever, maybe he needed to feel useful. I let him grab it. He walked behind me to get it, and as he did, he made a weird sound like he just saw something yummy. Immediately, I thought, oh no, it's going to be one of those situations where I have to awkwardly decline some advances. I ignored it. I needed a couple more things, and he insisted on getting them for me. Every time he walked behind me, he would make those disturbing sounds like he thought I was delicious. Right in my ear. Screw the rest of the stuff. I wanted to get out of there. I told him I was going to check out, and he reminded me about the other items I mentioned, saying he could still help me with them. "No, I need to be going home," I said firmly. I was definitely not friendly anymore and wasn't smiling. I went to push the cart, and again, in a creepy sing-songy voice, he insisted on doing it for me. We got to the checkout, and at this point I had texted my best friend about him, telling her his name. I can't remember it now. And that if anything happened to me, he was the one who did it. I was only half joking. He was really creeping me out at this point. At the register, one of the boards didn't have a tag on it. Mr. Creep said he'd go grab another. He walked behind me again and whispered, "Delicious," in my ear. I got chills. He came back with the board and walked behind me once more, managing to brush against my hip, even though we had plenty of room. As he did, he whispered, "I could just eat you up. Yum yum." I finally got checked out, but this creep was still hanging around. He offered to help me out to my car. I firmly said no. "Well, I need to take the cart back when you're done. It'll be easier," he said, or something like that. I am not letting him follow me to my car in this huge parking lot. He insisted he had to bring the cart with him. I said I'd just bring my car to the front and load it up. He finally relented and walked back inside. Thank God. I pulled my car to the front. He came out. "Let me load that for you," he said. "No," I responded. I had the board in my arms and he grabbed it from me with a terrible smile, saying in the creepiest, most seductive whisper possible, No, insert my name. I got this. I can get in there like swimwear." "Yes, ma'am." He gave a massive wink. How the hell does he know my name? My name is very unusual, and no one can guess it. My mom literally made it up. I was so skeeved out and felt incredibly unsafe, even though we were in front of the store and there were people around. He looked at me like I was prey. He finished loading my car and I didn't acknowledge or thank him. He scooted around and opened my car door for me, grinning. I completely ignored him but had to be next to him to get into my car. Right in my ear I heard him whisper, delicious." I gave him the most disgusted look I could muster. This didn't deter him. He licked his lips and winked again. I got into my car and locked the doors. As I put the car in drive, he tapped on my window and waved. I looked at him and I heard him say, "Safe drive back to," insert my apartment complex name. "It was nice getting to know you," insert my name. I pieced out so quick I've never seen that man before in my life and have no idea how he knew my name or where I lived. I have never gone back to that Lowe's. Every time I think about that incident, I kick myself for not reporting him. A bit of background. I'm 23 now, but I was 20 at the time. I moved in with my uncle in San Antonio, Texas, under the agreement that I wouldn't have to pay rent as long as I helped him with chores and looked after my cousins. I got a job at a well-known coffee chain downtown, near the touristy area. The place had a lot of regulars and some homeless people coming in and out. It was busy enough that I felt safe, and I even used to take walks around the area after work, especially since I was so close to the Riverwalk. A couple of months into the job, I'd become friends with everyone I worked with. We were all really close. On one particular day, it was one of my co-workers' last day. There were 3 guys who had been hanging around the shop all morning. They hadn't bought anything but were just loitering, which wasn't unusual for our location. On my break, I decided to walk down to a nearby drugstore to buy a farewell card and maybe a small gift for my coworker. I walked out and put my earphones in, but before I could press play, I heard the door open behind me and footsteps following. Whoever it was caught up to me and started walking beside me, matching my pace exactly. I turned to look and it was one of the guys who had been there all morning. He was a bit taller than me and reminded me a lot of Lakeith Stanfield. He asked for my number and I kindly told him no. He persisted, so I snapped and told him to screw off. He stared at me in surprise, probably because I don't look like someone who would speak up or be rude. He stood there as I walked away, and by the time I got back to the coffee shop, the guys were gone. I told my co-workers about the encounter and we laughed it off, thinking that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Every shift after that, he was always there, either hanging out or walking in mid-shift. Sometimes he was with someone else, sometimes alone, but he was always there. I assumed he was just another homeless person considering how often he was around. My shifts were sporadic. Sometimes I opened, sometimes I closed. Sometimes I worked mid, but no matter what, he was always there. I started to feel paranoid. I would catch him staring at me constantly. He never ordered anything and never spoke to me and thankfully never followed me, but he just sat there watching me. I mentioned it to my coworkers and they started noticing it too. One of my team leaders would sometimes help by sending me to the back to wash dishes or organize the cooler. Other coworkers would position themselves in ways to block him from seeing me. I started feeling uncomfortable at work. Some nights when I closed, a coworker would walk me to my car before heading home. Or if I didn't close, they would walk me to my car and then head back inside. Then one day while I was working the register, I noticed him again. This time he walked up and ordered a water. I asked for his name for the order. Now I had his first name just in case. He took the water and went back to his seat. I had mentioned him to my manager before, but since he hadn't done anything overtly wrong, there wasn't much they could do except note it in the manager's book. The next day I was working with my manager and 2 other coworkers and myself. I told them I needed to use the bathroom. There were 2 bathrooms next to each other, sort of hidden from the coffee bar and register, and they weren't gender specific. As I walked around the bar to the lobby area, I had to pass his table. As I did, I noticed him get up. I went into the bathroom, and while I was sitting down, someone rattled the knob. I shouted that it was occupied, but whoever it was just kept rattling the door until I finished. When I opened the door, no one was there. As I walked back to the coffee bar, I noticed him adjusting back into his chair. I was freaked out and immediately told my boss. He couldn't say anything to the guy though, since we had no proof that it was him. Later that shift, the man got up and picked up a coffee from the pickup area. My boss assumed he had ordered it and let him take it. I told him it wasn't his order and that it wasn't even his name. My boss then used this opportunity to tell him that if he did something like that again, he wouldn't be allowed back. The man apologized and, to his credit, followed the rules from that point on, but he still kept coming in, just sitting there watching me. Cut to Valentine's Day. One of my team leaders and I would be scheduled to work certain Thursdays after close to deep clean the store. We would stay until 1 a.m. This was one of those Thursdays. We were almost done and I had to clean the bathrooms as one of the last chores. When I finished and walked out, I saw him peeking in with both his hands pressed to the window, eyes wide, just staring at me with a super intense look. I froze for a second, just staring back. I noticed that on one of his palms, pressed to the window, there was a purple foam heart. He didn't move at all. I freaked out and backed into the bathroom. I shouted, "Hannah, Hannah, he's here, he's back." She barely heard me through the music we had blasting. Hannah, the team lead, would help hide me from him, so she knew the huge fear I had toward him. She walked toward the bathroom shouting back, "What are you saying? What's going on?" As soon as she got close, she saw him. I told her again, "He's here, he's watching me." She started shouting through the window, "You need to leave. If you don't leave, we're calling the police." I stepped out a little to see if he would leave, but he was ignoring her, his eyes fixated on me. I stepped back into the bathroom and my lead continued to shout at him to leave and threaten to call the police. About 5 minutes passed and he realized I wasn't stepping out until he left, so he did. The next day, my lead and I told my manager I wanted to file a police report. He told me to wait until he talked to his boss. He showed up again that day, but I was only there to talk to my manager and leave right after. When I got home, a friend convinced me to call the cops. I texted my boss saying that I didn't care what he or his boss said. I was scared and going to file the report. I dialed 911 and gave them a summarized version of the events. They told me they would send someone to where I lived to take the official report. The 2 officers were so nice and supportive. I told them my whole story, explaining how my boss didn't think it was necessary to involve the cops since I hadn't been harmed. The officers reassured me that I should have called right away and defended me, saying that they could get him for harassment. I thanked them, and they told me to call 911 if he showed up again so they could take him in for trespassing and harassment. I think that day my manager banned him and warned him because he never showed up to the coffee shop again. A few months later, when I felt comfortable downtown again, I went out with some friends to walk around. We were close to where I worked, and as we rounded a corner I saw him. I ducked into a little corner store and my friends followed. I told them I saw him and they kept an eye out. Once he was out of view, we left the store. That was the last time I saw him. So, creepy coffee shop stalker, let's not meet again.